Okay, thank you. All right, good evening, everyone. This is Lori Charlton, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the February 22nd, 2022 regular meeting of the Board of Finance, held via WebEx. I'll call the meeting to order and ask that we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
We'll probably have to bounce back and forth between these two meetings.
God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, members of the public, you are encouraged to send comments during or after the meeting to the following email, bof@fairfieldct.org. As you would with live public testimony, please remember to include your name and address in your email. For members of the public who have called in to listen or joined the WebEx via your computer, please know that you're muted and you will not be heard by more board members, and there will be no live public comment until called for by the chair during the meeting. As it relates to live public comment, the agenda for tonight's meeting includes the quarterly review, which is an informational presentation on the performance of our pension and OPEB trust funds, and an update on the town and Board of Ed performance against their operating budgets and their forecasts for the fiscal year. The agenda also includes, as item 6, an update from the Senior and Disabled Tax Relief Committee and a vote on their recommendation to convene a joint committee of the Board of Finance and RTM to consider changes to the Senior and Disabled Tax Relief Program. Members of the public who would like to make a statement to the board in relation to item 6 will have the opportunity to do so when that item is introduced. Statements will be limited to no more than 3 minutes per individual, and you can indicate your interest in making a statement via the chat box at any time during the meeting. All right, with that, we'll move on to item 3 to review the current status of the town's pension and OPEB funds. Can I have a motion to put this item before us? Mr. DeWitt? Seconded. Do I have a second? Mr. Curley, thank you. All right, Ms. Trabucco, the chair of the pension board, is traveling and couldn't be with us here tonight, but Mr. Eric Newman, who's the vice chair of the JRIB, has kindly agreed to stand in. Welcome, Mr. Newman. I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. Everybody, if you turn to page 9 of your handout, it's going. We'll begin there. To begin, this was a total pension performance as of December 31st, 2021. The total pensions assets under management is $409 million. The return for the 3 months was 4.43%. It outperformed the benchmark. On a fiscal year to date, we're up 4.82%, and on a 1 year, year over year, we're up 14.94%. Looking at the allocation, we have 32% allocated to U.S. equities, 21% to non-U.S. equities, 23% allocated to U.S. fixed income, 9.3% to international fixed income. We have a real estate allocation of 5.4%, and our private equity allocation is 7.5%. Flipping to page 10, you have a breakdown of how the individual assets have performed in the asset classes. The biggest driver this past quarter was our equity returning 6.32%, with the domestic equity returning 9.16% for the quarter. For fiscal year to date, equities returned 5%. Total equities, and on a 1 year basis, 18.7%. Domestic outperformed international equities with a year over year of returning 25%. Fixed income, due to low interest rates and the continued Fed issues, keeping the rates low this past year, it was pretty much flat, and with some slightly down on some of the aspects. But the real story of the performance of the pension plan was the private equity. On a quarterly basis, we returned 10.3%. Fiscal year, we're up at 23%, and year over year, 79%. This is due to the the returns of the various funds that we made many years ago, and they continue to pay out. The highest performing return for the fiscal year was our Mesro, returning 87%, and you can find that on page 11. This quarter, we made our first investment in a new private equity fund, HarborVest, 2021 vintage. We only had a small capital call of $150,000. And our real estate allocation returned 6.4% for the quarter. Fiscal year, we're up 10.3%, and 1 year, we're up 16%. Skipping down to the next page, it's just going to give you a statement of our cash flows with the private equities, seeing how we're going to be returning. And on page 13 will be the allocation of our private equity allocation. Moving on to page 14 is OPEB plan. OPEB has $79.9 million of assets under management. It returned 5.12% for the quarter and 4.54% for the fiscal year. 1 year return has been 15%. The allocation here is U.S. equities is at 46%, international equities at 27%, U.S. fixed income is at 13.5%, international fixed income is 5.8%, and our real estate allocation is at 8.3%. We only recently went into the private equity with the HarborVest. We only had a capital call of $40,000, so at this point, there isn't much in private equity. Going to page 15, you have the returns of the portfolio. Overall, for the quarter was 5%. Fiscal year to date, 4.54%, and 1 year was 15%. The total equity returned 6.45%. Fiscal year to date, 5.16%, and a 1 year, 18.82%. Domestic continue to outperform international equities, and our fixed income was pretty much flat due to low rate environment. And our private equity was flat because we just made an initial investment, and our real estate allocation for the 3 months was 6%. Fiscal year to date, 10.3%, and the 1 year was 16.35%. And any questions?
Okay, questions from the board for Mr. Newman?
I have a couple.
Mr. Stark?
On the private equity performance, it says cash flows. So do you have any sense of the underlying number of private equity investments? How many are realized rather than unrealized gains? Just roughly.
Off the top, I do not. The private
Okay.
equity funds were our Meslo is middle market. Private equity fund is a fund of funds. Our Lexington funds are secondary funds, and our HarborVest is going to be a commingled fund of funds as well.
Okay. And then when you say cash flows, does that mean money back to our coffers or back to some top level account? Where are those flows to?
They're flowing back to the plans.
Back to the plans. Okay. A concerned citizen expressed some concern about the 7.5% private equity allocation. I'm not saying I share that concern, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, or if you could reflect for us what the board's been thinking about whether that allocation is just right, too small, too big. How does it compare to other municipalities? Stuff like that.
Sure. I believe we're increasing we've voted to increase our allocation. Private equity has been performing very well over the past decade. It's a long-term investment. The plans are a long-term investment, so you got to go on a longer-term horizon. The private equity is uncorrelated to the public markets, meaning that when we have volatility in the public markets, as we might be experiencing the past couple of days, private equity funds are not going to have that same impact because investing in private companies are growing at very high rates, and majority of the companies in the U.S. and globally are privately held. So there's a tremendous amount of opportunities, and it's a way of mitigating lots of risk, taking risk or risk market risk off out of the equation, and they produce very good returns as we've experienced, as we can see over the years, and for a while we have we are in some earlier vintages which is producing really good returns, and we're continuing on with a new investment with HarborVest. That's a fund of funds. They're going to be investing in a variety of strategies, including co-investments within their funds, making directs, secondaries, as well as international exposure. So it adds to the diversity of the portfolio.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions from the board? Anyone? Okay. I have a quick one, Mr. Newman, just to follow up on Mr. Stark's question. I'm assuming that when, the question about the realized versus unrealized gains, when these funds have realized gains, they are then distributing the cash back to the pension fund, right? So we can look at the returned capital as an indicator of what, as a partial indicator of what's going on there. But I did have a question on just in general, when I look at the commitment years on the funds, we have the bulk of the dollars are in funds where the initial commitment year was close to or exceeding 10 years. Is that normal? What's the term of these? I mean, I guess I think of typically a private equity fund has a term of 10 years, and usually they're trying to wind down by then. So are these different than that, or can you just talk to us about the time horizon on these?
I'm not sure about when we went in there what the time horizon was, but these funds are taking longer to distribute their funds. The life expectancy of more recent fund issuances is going to be a longer term, because why sell out your good holdings to make the returns when by holding them you're going to get better returns over time. Being that there's tremendous amount of growth, sometimes you don't want to be forced to exit a strategy, exit positions in your portfolio companies too soon, when you can hold on to it and it continues to grow. So that's why you're going to start seeing much longer terms probably coming out. Other types of private equity investments, alternative investments, might have a shorter term because they're more liquid assets depending on their strategies. Private companies take time to grow, expand, and that's why. And it's a bunch of funds, so it's a fund of funds, so it's not even specific portfolio companies underlying. You have underlying number of different very high quality funds underneath there, and they have their own making investments and gain distributions, and then it feeds it up.
Okay, interesting. Just one other quick question. I know you've probably, or Ms. Trabuco's probably talked to us about this before, but the asset allocation, the difference between OPEB and pension, I know that because OPEB was smaller, it was a smaller portfolio, we were more geared toward equities. What's the tipping point in terms of size when you would expect those two asset allocations to start to mirror each other?
I don't have an answer for that right at the moment, but I'm sure we can get back to you on that.
Okay. Any other questions from the board? All right. Well, you got off easy, Eric.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. All right. With that, we're going to move on to item 4, which is to review the Board of Ed. The agenda says the fiscal year 23 first quarter financial update. Typo, it should obviously say second quarter. So can I have a motion to put that item before us? Mr. DeWitt, seconded by Mr. Mottola. Okay, this item is before us, and the backup for this item begins on page 37. And we have Ms. Courtney Laborious, the Executive Director of Finance and Business Services for Fairfield Public Schools, here to present. Welcome, Ms. Laborious.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you, Board. It's nice to be here with you virtually. First, I know it starts on 37. I'm gonna skip to the numbers. So if you could please turn forward to page 39. And if you'll recall, this is a statement of account. We decided to do it to mimic the way that the town presents the finances to the committee. And so you can see quarter one and quarter two side by side, so that we can look at a horizontal comparison of what we presented in the last iteration to this at a high level summary. So the top level of the document is our projected balances as of January 6th. And the bottom portion of the document is from our Munis reported system, which again includes the Q1 and Q2 unencumbered balances. And what we also do, which we're not showing here, is every month we also compare the unencumbered balance to the last 3 years' positions so that we can make sure that we're on track. And if we see anything that's anomalous and the dollar amount or the percent spend left is anomalous, we drill down into that. And so that's how that is helpful for us. So I'll start by let's see, go into, so the big picture, we have a large gap in pupil personnel services that we presented in Q1, and it grew from our last reporting period, which means that we needed to take measures to offset that gap. So you'll see that where we came in Q1 showing a bottom line gap for the Board of Ed of $880,000. We've now shown closing that gap. At the same time, the deficit for pupil personnel grew from 2.2 to 2.9 million. So the first thing I want to explain is what is the gap of 2.9 million. The gap is due to tuition and settlement costs higher than budgeted, as well as professional consultation, speech, and other support services. The excess cost reimbursement from the state has not kept pace with the need statewide, and we have higher than originally anticipated costs. And second, why did the gap grow? Why was our Q1 estimate different than our Q2? That's due to a few factors. It varies because the estimate for overall expenses increased by $360,171 related to speech services, homebound services, and professional services that were needed in a particular year of high needs for our students. Then secondly, the net revenue decreased by approximately $345,000 between Q1 and Q2, and that's a result of the projected excess cost reimbursement rate. Initially, we had a higher rate. We lowered that rate in this Q2 assumption. We're hopeful that the rate of reimbursement itself will be higher when we come back with our Q3, but we thought it prudent to reflect a more average rate, meaning the average of the last 3 or 4 years. And after speaking with colleagues, going back to our 73% estimated rate, which is what you'll also see in the budget when we get to the budget as well. And if it comes in better than that, we can lift the freeze, which I'll explain later on the capital services. But for Q2, we felt it prudent to handle it this way. And then finally, a decrease in IDEA funds available for operations, offset by additional ARP IDEA revenue that's being utilized for tuitions. And then third, I wanted to highlight how did we, oh, I'm sorry. I see someone's hand. Should I pause here, Chairwoman? No, okay, we'll get to questions.
Yeah, why don't you finish and then we'll take questions.
Okay. So third, what are we doing to cover the gap? We froze equipment spending, school capital and tech capital for approximately $375,000. We also instituted a hiring freeze on certain positions that we had been thus far unable to fill, and built that into our assumption for the remainder of the year. We will be able to lift that freeze if we come in better than expected in the excess cost reimbursement, as well as we had savings in staffing and insurance due to attrition and vacancies. So now I wanted to turn your attention to page 40, which is the same as page 39. It's just in greater detail. And so page 40 in personnel services, we went from 455 to 1.4 million. And the reason for that was there's additional open choice revenue that had not been budgeted, that we made a correction to budget, and it is in the budget going forward. We're counting a larger number of vacancies to backfill at a higher rate in Q1, as well as leaves of absences. We also have not been able to fill some of the vacant positions at our full fill rate, and our retirements were higher than we originally budgeted for, which was fortunate for us in this budget, but it's unprecedented. So we had budgeted for $380,000 in retirements, and we're seeing close to $800,000 savings as a result of retirements, meaning that as people retire, they've reached the peak of their career, they're at the top of their salary scale, and when we hire, we're able to hire oftentimes teachers that our budget assumes at a lower rate. The next category is the fixed charges. You'll see that we have a correction to reflect the current vacancies, as well as an assumption about family changes that did not bear out, an assumption that was made in the development of this year's budget. In pupil personnel, as I explained earlier, there are some transportation savings that we anticipate will offset the costs in special education due to a decrease in buses. And also it's accounting for increased fuel costs and a decrease in pre-K revenue. This will need to be refined as we get a closer picture in the third quarter. The school expenses, you can see a minor savings in copier services. We're fortunate that we're using more of technology, so we're using less paper. The support expenses, in the support expenses, I wanted to point out that there's a correction in an error that occurred with the magnet school tuition. The magnet school tuition has been adjusted to reflect the actual magnet school tuition. Originally, there was an unencumbered balance that hadn't been accounted for. Although we are seeing a decline in enrollment, the Q1 projection did not take into account the encumbrances for future bills. That's been corrected here. Maintenance and operations, not much has changed from Q1 except for a minor increase in transportation savings, and that's associated with VOAG usage, vocational programs. We were, during Q2, holding utilities flat, and we usually do that up to Q2, and we'll be updating that next month, meaning in our Q3 projections that we present to the board. And if we're able to utilize savings there, we'll unfreeze capital, and we'll do so during the Q3. The capital outlay you're seeing is the savings there are mainly due to the freeze on capital equipment that I mentioned earlier. And then in the next page, on page 42 is a recapitulation of the earlier results. It's just a different summary. And then page 43 starts your regular Munis reporting that is showing our expenditures, encumbrances, and our unencumbered balances as of that January 6th date. Then it's followed by the grant revenue expense, which includes ESSER 2, ARP ESSER, and the ARP IDEA preschool, as well as ARP IDEA Part B appropriation and expenditure reports. And broadly speaking, our overall grant revenue is $12.5 million, of which we'd expended $1.9 million at that point in time. This is a multi-year plan for those federal funds for the ESSER 2, ARP ESSER, and the ARP IDEA. We would expect to have drawn down this amount by this time this year had we not received the excess cost revenue and the large federal grants that are multi-year. So this ESSER 2 and ARP ESSER, as of the Jan 6th, there were no changes to the budget since our last report, and expenditures had increased slightly as we continue to purchase items and pay staff. We briefed the board in February at our last board meeting. As a result of the budget conversations that we had with the board, we were able to reduce the original superintendent budget request by about $700,000, working in collaboration with the board as we shifted some of the expenses to the ARP grants, ARP and ESSER 2 grants for those expenditures that were eligible and would not cause an operational cliff. And I will pause there and I'll take any questions on what I've presented so far.
All right, thank you, Ms. Laborious. Mr. DeWitt, you have a question?
Several, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chris DeWitt.
Okay.
First question. You mentioned open choice. There was a revenue reduction open choice. Where is that? What page is that on?
So the open choice revenue, we accounted for it in the projection. So you would see that in the salary account. So where we have our wage, it's called the staff replacement line, I believe. Let me just see the
So
exact name.
under personnel services number 1.
Correct. Under
Staff
personnel,
replacement?
correct, staff replacement. So
Okay.
within that category, yeah, essentially there was $100,000 last year of additional open choice revenue. This was booked in the revenue side, but they didn't adjust the expense to reflect that. We fixed that, we corrected that, we made sure there's a process to correctly capture that going forward.
Got it. You also mentioned a decrease in pre-K revenue.
Correct.
Where is that reflected?
So that's in the transportation line. It's a net impact against the special ed transportation. So the pre-K tuition has been historically utilized to offset that line. We are
So
not.
I'm sorry, what line is that? Is that under pupil personnel expenses?
It is in this page 40. It is under pupil personnel expenses. Under transportation contract, it would be a net impact within that 183,030, line 18.
So I certainly want to, I'm very curious to hear. We talked before COVID, pre-K was a big discussion point in this town. And I'm curious why we think the revenue is going down when I thought we expanded the amount of locations we had in town. And, I know we expanded into different schools. So why is pre-K revenue down?
So the enrollments are not down. It's our ability, it's our collections that's down. And that's something that we're looking into now to determine why the collections have not kept pace with what we budgeted. But the enrollment is not down. The enrollment is strong, and it's the collections factor against what was projected in the budget.
So the kids are still there. We're just not charging anybody for them.
We're charging them. I do think the revenue might have been overstated in the past, so I'm more than happy to get you a summary of that historical for future.
Yeah, I think that would be a good thing for the board.
Sure.
And then I just have an overall statement looking at and thank you for the information. The information is very informative. And I read it before the meeting, and I was really hoping I read it wrong, but I don't think I did, right? So everyone seems perfectly fine with the special ed expenses going $700,000 deeper in the hole in the last quarter. We also seem like you're perfectly happy with a hiring freeze. This is all words you used. Less buses, capital on hold, and lower maintenance. So I'm really confused in a budget year where the Board of Ed has come in with the highest increase in God knows as many years as I've been doing it, how we all think that this makes a whole lot of sense, and how you can legitimately say we are going to be $1 right onto budget as of Q2. I'm just flabbergasted by the whole thing.
So first, I'll just answer. You went through the different categories. So number one, yes, it is concerning that we had a big swing of sped between Q1 and Q2. Speaking with colleagues, I think we're seeing that throughout the state. And it is a concern that we have addressed in this budget, because we don't want to be in this position in the future. We don't want to keep having to freeze capital funds. And I'll have Superintendent Cummings address that, but this was a big priority for us during this budget, was to be able to continue to, spend our budget as it was appropriated in future budget cycles, and to account for this need in special education. On the transportation side, this is a result of COVID. We needed to keep those monies in the transportation budget in the event that the families that had been.
I'm sorry, Ms. Laborious, I'm just going to interrupt for a minute. Can everyone please mute their microphones if you're not speaking? There's getting a lot of background.
Let me mute.
Okay.
Thank you.
I apologize. So everyone that had been transporting their students that were entitled to busing services, we did feel it was prudent to hold aside that funding in the event that the parents did come back to us and require those services. Since we have a better experience now that we're deeper into the year, knowing that many of the parents that have transported their students earlier are going to continue to do so. So we feel comfortable counting on those savings this year, which is a unique situation related to the pandemic, to offset some of our needs in other areas.
Can I have, could I have a moment just to speak to the special ed overages?
Sure.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to get a chance to speak. Rob Mancusi, Executive Director of Special Education. It's nice to see all of you again tonight. I can tell you firsthand, we're not happy about the deficit that the special education budget is currently in, the state of it. I will say I've tried to be as transparent as possible with the toll this pandemic has taken on, special education, our students and our families. And this year particularly, we've had such a struggle filling all our positions. We've had to contract for speech services a lot more this year than we have in the past, and we've had to fill para positions that we were unable to fill because the pool of candidates has shrunk so much since the pandemic. So, that's caused a significant increase in the support staff when you're contracting services with private agencies versus being able to hire your own paraprofessionals. Additionally, we did not anticipate that we were going to have a $345,000 less in revenue from the excess cost grant than we projected. And then obviously back in Q1, we were talking about this year, we've had an increase in the number of students we've had to outplace because of the increase in student learning needs, as well as particularly social, emotional, and mental health needs. And then we've had an increase as well in our unilateral placements. During our budget presentation to the Board of Finance, we're going to be sharing some specific information. Hopefully that'll show a pattern, tell a story, and answer many questions that you may have. But as always, any information or any requests for information that you need to answer your questions and concerns, because I understand your questions and concerns, we share them. Just please forward them to Mr. Cummings, to myself, to Mrs. Vitale, and we'll be happy to answer them the best we can.
So, I'm sorry, Ms. Charlton, may I?
Yeah, please go ahead.
We could rewind a quarter, and you were giving that speech, and I'll rewind a quarter, and I'll give the same speech I gave, right? I don't know when the Board of Ed is going to take leadership on this, right? It's clear that there's no equity here, right? You're freezing hiring, you're putting capital on hold, and you're lowering maintenance. And in your next year's budget, the increase in sped is crazy in next year's budget. And I started looking at other communities; they're not going up the same percentage. So listen, I don't even know what explanation that would make me feel better about this. I'm just trying to say that the only history I have here is consistently overrunning budget every quarter after we get into a fiscal year. That's the only history I have here. So thank you, Ms. Charlton, for indulging me.
All right. Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. I don't know if Mr. Mancusi do you want to respond, or should I just move on to more questions? Oh, Mr. Peterson, do you want to respond?
Thank you, Jeff Peterson for the Board of Ed. I really just want to say to Mr. DeWitt that the board is not blind to what's going on here. If you watch I believe it was the January 11th meeting where we were presented with this Q2 data, we asked a lot of the same questions that you're asking now. And we did lay out to the administration that we wanted a greater detail in how estimates were going to be made for the 22-23 school year. And obviously that'll be more appropriate to talk about in those meetings, but this is absolutely something that the board is aware of, and we've spoken about at length in open meetings and also in our finance committee, because like you say, we have other priorities, and it is somewhat frustrating on a regular basis to see other priorities get crowded out by this very necessary funding, by the way. I don't want to at all say that this is a problem or this is something this is absolutely a priority for us and an important area of spending, but it makes planning very difficult and it makes our job a little more frustrating. And I will say that we got a great level of detail from the administration in this budget cycle. I don't know it's going to answer all of your questions, but as we go through the budget season, there's a lot more detail that we asked for and that we received from the administration on the budget estimation process.
So, Mr. Peterson, you know what? I want to apologize. You're absolutely right, because I did watch that meeting, and I thought the board asked very good questions. So, I've used the word board 3-4 times. I guess I really meant central office, because again, I did see that meeting, and I thought everyone on the board asked very good questions. So my apologies for that, for the inference to the board and not central administration. So.
All right, thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Mr. Cummings, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I do, and I appreciate what Mr. DeWitt's saying, but at the same time, I have to take exception that anybody would think that the central office, as Mr. Mancusi already said, is happy with these numbers or is content with them. If you're reading numbers off a dry sheet and you're making some interpretation of how people feel about it, you're making a mistake. This is very concerning to us. We spent a lot of time going over these numbers. As you mentioned several times, our budget request for 22-23 is largely based on the trends we're seeing in special ed. We've sat in multiple Board of Finance meetings over the past couple of years. Mr. DeWitt, you've been very clear that we've not budgeted accurately. And you're right. So as we think ahead to the next year's budget is an attempt to correct for that, because what we are seeing is a trend that is happening in Fairfield. It's happening across the state. I talked to my colleagues. Everybody is very concerned about where special ed is going. At the same time, the state is pulling back on funding sources. So there's a response that we were compelled to respond to the learning needs of kids. We would like to see a corresponding response from the state to recognize that this is a growing problem. And as Mr. Mancusi stated, the problem is being compounded by the social emotional impacts of the pandemic on kids. So again, I just want to emphasize from my team, we spend so much of our time addressing this issue. And I know that everybody thinks Mr. Mancusi is a really nice guy and gives money away. He is a nice guy, but he doesn't give money away. This is part of the system that we're working within. And as you know, because we've talked about this before, the rules don't necessarily favor the school districts and the boards of education nor the towns.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cummings. Appreciate that. Mr. Testani.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just have a follow-up and sort of a dovetail off what Mr. DeWitt was saying. Some of his theme, I'm going to save my comments for the overall Board of Ed budget when we get to it during the regular budget time. However, having said that, with the $700,000 deficit, I understand it's nice to say words like concerned. It's nice to say things like the Board of Ed, which I know did talk about it. I'm curious about what specific steps, if any, have taken to, number one, overcome the $700,000 deficit in that line item. Let's start with that. And number two, we talk about it, as Mr. DeWitt alluded to, almost every Board of Finance session that involves the Board of Ed when we get to the special ed component piece of it. No matter what the deficit is, we have the same conversation for those that are new to the Board of Finance every time. And I think one of my suggestions had been a while ago that perhaps there should be a separate way that the Board of Ed focuses just on special ed, so that these budget issues, for lack of a better word, don't come up every single time we have a Board of Finance meeting, because it's almost like sort of the same Groundhog's Day all over again, to use a Yogi Berra expression. We're talking now, it's a $700,000 deficit. I don't remember what they were in previous meetings. And last year we blamed COVID also last year. I'm not saying COVID wasn't an issue, but is that going to be the issue next year as well? Is there going to be another $700,000 deficit next quarter? or $150,000 deficit next quarter. You see, what I want to know is what specific financial implements are being created, number one, to address the deficit we have now, and number two, to avoid it in the future. Thank you.
So
Okay, who wants to take that?
I would be happy to answer that. It's Rob Mancusi again.
Rob, can you hold up 1 second?
Sure.
Mr. Testani, I think a couple things. One, to your question of how we're addressing this, you'll see is, the board supported, all boards supported last year a budget initiative that for Early Literacy Academy. We're looking to address part of this issue by working to keep students in school in the district. Part of that is improving the instructional program for all kids, but the other part of that is increasing our intervention program. So the Early Literacy Academy at McKinley School this year has 1 cohort of kids. We're budgeting for a 2nd cohort. So part of the work is the proactive work, right? To knock down the costs and keep kids in district so we don't have these out of district. But you raised another good question around the kind of future projection of this. And the difficulty we're all in is, while the pandemic may become endemic in terms of its the transmission of disease, the long-term impacts of our kids are still going to be felt. And that's where we're struggling, again, to determine how to best address that. And so I wish I could give you a better answer because it would make all of our lives better. But right now, how the long-term impact of the pandemic is going to be on kids is still to be determined. So we continue to work on this. I will struggle we'll continue to try to refine the answer that would satisfy all of us, but that's going to take some work because for us, in some ways, the end of this is not yet in sight, if it all makes sense.
It does, Mr. Cummings, and I appreciate that. However, my specific question of what's being done to address the $700,000, and that's just one obviously small piece of a larger budget. It's more in my mind, and perhaps I don't want to speak for Mr. DeWitt, but in a similar way, I referenced it, and I know he did, that there have been these other deficits we've had to address in other budgets from, special ed. So what is being done, if anything, about this specific situation now?
Ms. Laborious can speak to how we're addressing the immediate need.
Okay. Thank you. I was just
Thank you.
curious. Appreciate it.
Sure. So the first thing we're doing is Mr. Mancusi and myself are meeting monthly. We do monthly looks at every aspect of the projection and drill down into them. The second thing we're doing is meeting with the Board of Finance. I'm sorry, not the board. You are the board. With the Finance Committee of the Board of Education to develop appropriate and transparent means of reporting back in a timely fashion. So we're likely going to recommend that's monthly in a format that has some level of detail that will be acceptable, that ties the trend of our student population with the financials. I do think that that's going to go a long way to having all of us be on the same page and be educated about what's happening in a given year in real time. The third thing that we're doing is budgeting appropriately next year. So we spent a lot of time developing the budget for next year. We look forward to the conversations about the budget for next year because we do think it's needed and it's warranted for the special ed portion of the budget. And in addition, for this year, we are, Mr. Mancusi mentioned earlier that he's had to utilize contracted services, which is why we saw a big increase in that contracted services line. Part of the reason that you see a big savings on the personnel side is because he's had to do speech and language pathologists on the contract side. Therefore, we haven't hired. So because we haven't been able to hire, we have some savings on the staffing side that are offsetting that. That's one of the pieces that's offsetting that contracted increase, as well as the benefits that go with those positions for those speech language pathologists and also the paraeducators. In addition, as I mentioned, there's a little bit of bus savings as a result of not running as many buses during the pandemic period. And we do have a minor freeze on school capital. I just want to say also, we never want to be in a freeze situation, but it is not uncommon to freeze capital spending until the spring when you have a better sense of your budget. In a school budget, that we do have to be very prudent about how we use the taxpayer resources. So those are the strategies that we're doing. Frequent monitoring, transparent reporting, working with the finance committee at the board to develop a way to report this back more frequently, and developing the budget appropriately for next year.
And thank you for, making those statements. And forgive me for belaboring this issue. I still didn't hear how a $700,000 deficit is going to be rectified.
Oh, so specifically, we have savings in personnel because that's.
And that makes up the $700,000 difference you're
It
saying.
makes up, yeah, a large portion of $700,000. Yes,
Oh,
correct.
that's my.
Yes, I
and-
apologize for not being more direct. And
No. I just wanted to have a better grasp of that. And those steps you mentioned will help prevent that type of deficit in the future.
yeah, and yes, correct. And being able to manage it in more real time and be transparent. Correct.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Testani. Ms. Marmion.
Thanks so much. Can you just clarify for me, because I remember hearing, I believe it was last year, that we were contracting with different rehab professionals, and that we thought that that would save us money. I don't know if that was OTPT and then speech you're looking to hire internally at the school system, but what is the status of that? And in terms of cost savings, has it not appeared?
This is Rob Mancusi again. We did go out to bid last year for OTPT, and we landed with Constellation, who is our OT and PT contracted providers. We have realized savings in that area, and we have real numbers that make budgeting and for OTPT a lot more on target. We have approximately 31 speech pathologists in district. Our need is greater than that, so every year we have to contract with additional agencies to, supplement the work of our speech department so we can meet the mandates of student IEPs. So this year we've had an increased need in speech. This is a shortage area. It is extremely difficult to find speech pathologists in Connecticut. We're all competing for the same folks because it's a shortage area. So, with the decrease in supply and the increase in demand, sometimes we are, having to hire people or contract with people at a much higher hourly rate than we would want to. But in order to meet those mandated needs and not be in a position where we owe students compensatory services, we have to do that. I just wanted to add, we're also going out to bid. We're working with the town, going out to bid for our contracted nursing. We talked a little bit about last year about the costs for the contracted nurses that we have to hire for our medically fragile students. So we think we can get a better rate if that goes out to bid. And then we're going out to bid also for a lot of our consultation services, particularly related to our high cost literacy consultations and evaluations, as well as the high costs of psychiatric evaluations and consultations. And just one of the ways we're working on now to increasing our revenue is we are having 2 open houses in March with area towns and special ed directors to come visit our Walter Fitzgerald campus, which is our alternative high school located at our new school on Barbary Road. And we had a student this year, and we have another student coming. The one student that we had went back to district, and we have another potential tuition student on the horizon, and we're looking to increase that. So that's just one way. And obviously, we're always looking at our in-district programming and out-of-district programming and see what need we're not meeting for the kids who are outplaced or unilaterally placed, and to look at the possibility of building in-district programming, so we don't have those large overages.
Thank you. I just have one other question. How are you addressing the dearth of paraprofessionals? Which is, I know it's an issue. I mean, I know that their contract was under review as well. And what's going on with that? Because this is an ongoing issue, correct?
Well, filling all open para positions this year, we haven't been able to do it. It's just been a constant challenge. That's why we've had to contract with some agencies to fill those vacancies, but at a much higher rate. But we've had to do it in order to maintain safety for students and the integrity of programming for students. So
what's the long-term plan, though? I mean, this is such a significant cost if you're contracting at higher. What's the strategy?
I know the board this contract is under negotiation. I know we've looked at compensation of our paraprofessionals compared to paraprofessionals in area districts where we're pretty low. So I think through that negotiations process, over time, we will be more competitive in that area.
Ms. Vitale, did you have something to add to that?
Really just to reiterate that we are currently in negotiations with the paraprofessionals, so I really can't give too much detail on that because it is ongoing. Hopefully, the pandemic will be behind us, and the staffing shortages that we have seen over the last 2 years with our schools in various areas will not be as much of a challenge moving forward. I think it's thrown us for a loop in all areas. It's been a shortage area for speech and language pathologists, but now it's even more challenging over the last 2 years. Just supply and demand, as Mr. Mancusi said. Same thing with our paraprofessionals. The school districts are scurrying for substitute teachers, paras, teachers. There's only so many people available, but we try to be welcoming. We try to be competitive in our salary. We try to meet the needs of our children. As we speak about special education, I realize the numbers, as Mr. Peterson said, it is an area of concern for the board, but we also need to remember that behind every dollar, there are children that are coming to us with newly identified needs. And you can forecast only so much, but we are these are unprecedented times, and this is not meant as an excuse. I think that we all can realize that it's affected everybody differently. Our children, more than anyone, just their lives have been upended, even though we've been trying to provide some stability. And I think that, as Mr. Cummings said, we try to budget accordingly. We'll be having those discussions with you next month. Looking forward to more accurately budget. So we're not spending every quarterly report talking about special ed, but the need is still going to be there. These are our kids, these are our students. We have an obligation to deliver a free and appropriate education to these students, but we also have a responsibility to do it as effectively and efficiently as possible. And that work is ongoing. And we are committed to looking at it from many different angles, from cost avoidance by building programming in-house so we don't have to outplace as many students, for going out to bid for some of these services, to being more competitive so we can keep our paraprofessionals in district and not have to contract out. There's many different pieces to this, and I want to assure you that we're committed to bringing this line item, these various line items in.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Ms. Marmion, did you have anything else? No. Okay, thank you. Other questions from the board? Mr. Mottola.
Thank you very much. So, Ms. Laborious, you said something to the effect that you're hoping we're going to get a higher state reimbursement than what we anticipated, and then you'd be able to lift some of these freeze items. When will we know that? Is that usually we find out in May? Is that the time period, what we're going to get?
We expect to know that, I believe it's in March. It's very soon. We don't,
Okay.
yeah. It's, we get our first reimbursement in February, which I believe we did just get. And then they do the true up, and I believe we hear that in March. Is that correct, Mr. Mancusi?
Yes, we expect to hear very soon.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. And then I guess this is to Mr. Cummings. I know you said something to the effect that this is a problem throughout many districts and that, you know, there's some at least hope that maybe the state might assist all these districts in this area. Do you have any indication that that's going to happen, at least maybe on a temporary basis over the next couple of years?
Well, Ms. Mottola, I appreciate that. I know this has been under a lot of discussion with the state for years. I think there's growing pressure because of the pandemic and its impact on districts across the state. I'm not sure, though, where the state legislature will land on something like this. There's a desire. This has long been underfunded. I just don't know if there's a political will there, and given that it's a short session, the time to get something accomplished. But it is desperately needed. It's desperately needed by everybody.
Yeah. Okay.
Mr. Mottola, I
Right.
will just add the board leadership and district leadership did meet with our state delegation, and this was probably the most important thing that we talked to them about just fully funding the excess cost grant for special education. Many districts, I've been speaking to other board chairs, we've been at many legislative breakfasts over the last 3 months, and this is the constant theme, is to just better fund this, fully fund this. Any additional funding would be greatly appreciated by, I think I speak for every district in Connecticut right now. So any advocacy that you would like to give to our state reps, we would appreciate more voices that they hear from, the better. That's my plug for you guys.
Christine, if I could add on top of that, if I'm not mistaken, our legislative liaison, Jen Jacobson, spoke to me last week about the excess cost in the draft budget. I believe that the current proposal is to keep it flat for what would be the 5th consecutive year of not increasing that line in the state budget.
That is what the governor has put forward.
Yeah.
So the legislature would have to do something about that.
This was a problem before COVID too. I mean, it's not, I mean, COVID's made it worse. So, all right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mottola. Any other questions from the board? Okay, I don't see any. Mr. DeWitt, are you just motioning or is that, no, thumbs up? Okay. All right. Well, I guess that's it. I want to thank you all. Thanks, Ms. Laborious, Mr. Cummings, Mr. Mancusi, our Board of Ed reps. Appreciate you being here and look forward to speaking with you again shortly during our budget hearings. Thanks again.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Have a nice night, everybody.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, we're going to move on to item 5 to review the town side FY23. Again, first quarter typo, actually second quarter financial update. Can I have a motion to put this before us? Mr. DeWitt, seconded by Ms. Marmion. Okay, this motion is before us. The backup for this item begins on page 50. And I believe our Chief Fiscal Officer, Mr. Schmidt, is going to take us through this, or would that be Ms. Bassi? I don't see Jared on.
I could start.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if we want to go to the projected net estimated operational variance.
And by the way,
summary
sorry,
sheet.
everyone, that's page 51, my mistake. Page 51 of the back.
Okay.
Go ahead, Caitlin.
Okay, the top part, as always, is the revenue. You're going to see your familiar quarter one numbers of the approximate $7 million favorable. As you can see, it's gotten a little bit more favorable from Q2. It's now grown to a projected $8.6 million variance. And if we start at the top with the current prior and interest, we're projecting about $1 million more than we were projecting in Q1. Q1, as you guys can recall, was the big Bradley Jack check that came in for the $6.8 million, catching up that property. In addition to the 6 to 8, we are seeing our collection rate a little bit higher than we did in Q1. So we're projecting about $1 million or so more on the current piece alone. We are at, as of January, I use January numbers because that was given to us for this. We're about, it's a little bit weird to compare these percentages now because of our COVID and our deferments. We're 3% higher than we were last year as of last January because that was a deferment month. So everything is a little bit skewed right now in terms of looking at last year's and comparing to where we were. So we're at 74.9% of our collectible, which is about 76% of our budget. And just to give you a feel, last year we were at 71.8 of our collectible and at 72.76%. So it's hard now to kind of compare to last year. So even stepping back and looking at January of 2020, we're about 1% higher than when we were January 31st of 2020. So we're trending a little bit higher than we have been the last 2 years, hence the about $1 million or so we're projecting more on the current, in addition to the 6-8 from the Bradley Jack estate. So that accounts for about $1 million more of our favorability on the revenue piece. If we go down, a lot of these numbers haven't changed a lot, but that was the largest swing. Investment income, as we know, rates are still low. Still projecting about $1 million under, not knowing what exactly the feds are going to do coming up soon. So we're kind of expecting it to maybe go up a little bit, but we're not sure. So we're keeping that $1 million there as our investment income underage. Conveyance, again, Q1, Q2 is the same. We're projecting about a $750. We know there's not a ton of inventory, but we've seen favorable interest rates, you know, in the Q1 and Q2 period, and the spring market is coming up. So the town clerk said she's pretty comfortable with the $725 or $750 there, as we were in Q1. Ecc subsidies, these numbers are going to change a little bit just because in Q1 we had assumed, if you see the asterisk, the January 1st opening. Now it's been pushed back. It is open, but the town is projecting to move in March, with Westport coming at about a 30-day lag. So we have a little bit less expected in the Ecc subsidies, which is partially from the state and then partially from the Westport New Canaan contribution there. So that got a little bit more unfavorable by about $75,000 from Q1. Parking rec revenue, that's our other big driver for our increase. Went up from about $210 to $750. And speaking with Anthony, basically, beach stickers is a small piece that they're projecting. And again, most of these, if not all of these revenue numbers have gone up in the budget for 23, so they've been accounted for next year. But beach stickers, they're projecting about a $72,000 overage. Boat storage, they're projecting about 11 because now there's winter and summer. So if you guys notice down at the marina, there's a lot of boats in the parking lots there too. So they're taking in some revenue there. And the biggest driver is golf. He's projecting about $465,000 favorability to budget. And again, those have increased budgets for next year, but there's also a $1 round fee increase coming in Q3 and Q4. So those numbers take that all into consideration as well. In addition to the facilities, Penfield, Jackie, and field rentals, he's projecting about almost another $200,000 for those revenue items. And again, budgets have been increased there as well. So that really accounts for the increase of about $550,000 from Q1 to Q2 on the park and rec revenue. The golf courses did, I reached out to them today, they did close a little bit later this year, and that was part of the increased revenue as well. He told me, I believe that they closed on December 15th, which was a little bit later than the past couple of years. So that accounted for a little bit more of the favorability in Q2 as well. Fire marshal fees, they're projecting a little bit less of an underage. As of Q1, they were thinking that they were going to be 200,000 under, now about 100,000 over. There's about 3 properties that he's thinking or that are going to actually come in. One being the Fairfield U dorms, and there's 2 others. Phase 1 of the Metro Center and an apartment building at 44 Castle Avenue. The other major commercial projects have a little bit stalled, so that was his best guesstimate as of Q2 to be about 100,000 under on the fire marshal fees. State revenues, you can see, really unchanged from Q1 to Q2. And other revenue got slightly more favorable by about $40,000. A lot of overage, little under, little over, and you guys could see that in the revenue comment section of the detail of the revenue lines there, but nothing too alarming. There's things that go down a little bit and things that are over a little bit as well, and you could see those in the comment section of the revenue report. So taking the revenue into consideration, we're projecting about an $8.6 million favorable overage there from the $7 million from Q1. Do you guys have any questions on the revenue, or should I move down to the expense?
Why don't you walk through the whole thing and then we'll take questions on both.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, the expense side, not as much as a variance. We're going from about $1 million favorable from Q1 to about $1.3 million. The largest swing is really, I guess, due to the ECC. Again, the ECC Center, the delayed opening caused us more savings as well. But the vacancies in churn were about at a $500,000 as we were in Q1. Not a lot of vacancies right now. I believe there's 3 part-time nurses and a library associate. But other than that, it's the churn of people leaving, people coming in, and then some timing with people not being there for a month or 2 to fill the positions. Park and rec expense, slightly a little bit unfavorable, again, due to the seasonals for the overage and the golf revenue. So that corresponds to a little bit being over on the expense side. Again, not a large number. The ECC, we're expecting now favorability of the 672, again, due to the delayed opening. So the deputy chief went through line by line and looked at where he thought that we would end up for the ECC, given the assumption of the March and April transfers from Fairfield and Westport. The DPW utility loan stayed constant. That's all over. And then the other got slightly more favorable, going from a negative 85 to a favorable 130. Again, a lot of little ins and outs on the expense lines between slightly smaller variances on the positive side and some being slightly negative, as you guys could see in the comment section of the expense report as well. So if you add up the revenue and the expenses, we're looking at, really slightly under $10 million as of Q2. Going from 8 to almost 10 for the town side of the equation.
All right. Well, that's a big number.
Big number.
Yes. Questions from the board? Mr. DeWitt.
More statement. Thank you, Madam Chair. More statement than anything. I was going to say, well, now that's a quarterly report when you're coming in $10 million to the in the black, right? So thank you for that. I'm surprised to see Parks and Rec revenue up based on the fact that we're going to be losing some revenue from Penfield. So that's a very encouraging number, because I think that number would be much higher if we were if we still had Penfield Pavilion open. I just clicked away from this. And then my last statement is, good for the taxpayers of Fairfield. Once again, they come through. We were really worried in our zero budget year about how they were going to come through, and they beat all our numbers, and they're beating our numbers again in this quarter compared to 2 years ago. So, kudos to the Fairfield taxpayers. They're paying their bills, and we're reaping the benefit here. So, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Other comments from the board? Questions? Mr. Curley.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just have one question. I appreciate the report. Obviously, great news. I agree, and very well presented as well. So thank you for that, Caitlin. I thought it was really a good news story, but it was presented well too. So thanks. But question is, obviously, one of the things that happened in the fourth quarter was the Newport Academy settlement, and I was trying to figure out where that activity might have fallen in the results and how that might have affected the numbers.
So the insurance, and Jared, if you want to go, but that runs through our risk management, our internal service fund, which is not the general fund, but I believe that's covered through KERMA. Jared, is that correct?
Yes.
Madam Chair, just a point of order. Sorry to interrupt, but I'm not sure how much we can discuss this. We may have to go into executive session. The attorneys on the call would know more than I do, but I just want to be careful about how much we talk about with regard to a legal settlement. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry, and maybe Jared, I don't recall if anything was disclosed publicly, or if anything can be disclosed publicly. Do you want to comment? I mean, I think the short answer to Mr. Curley's question is that, and nothing would be reflected in these numbers since this is the general fund and it would have gone through the internal service fund. Jared or Caitlin, can you comment any further, or is that not appropriate?
I don't think I'd want to comment any further on it.
Okay.
That's fine.
All right. Thank you for that. Mr. Walsh. I'm sorry, Mr. Curley, did you have anything else?
No, all set. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Walsh.
Just on that last question, suffice to say, Caitlin, regardless, that whatever it is, settlement or whatever, it's not going to have any effect on the form, the variance is the document we're looking at, correct?
I believe that's a true statement. Jared, do you agree?
I apologize. I'm on two meetings at once. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I was saying that the variance document we're looking at right now, the settlement that we just talked about, has nothing to do with the variance report we're looking at.
That's correct.
So we can move on to that issue.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Walsh. And yeah, just to clarify for everyone, I mean, we have the separate internal service fund where we account for those types of contingencies, and whatever runs through that, and the internal service fund ultimately does get replenished by the general fund as needed, but that would be a next year budget item versus an impact on current year operations. Other questions from the board on this? Okay, I don't see any. I guess when you get a quarterly report that says you have a $10 million surplus, nobody needs to hear anything else. So,
other than congratulations. Nice job, Caitlin and Jared and the administration. How about that?
Madam Chair, can I just I just want to say thank you to Caitlin for putting this together, even though the numbers work out very well and in our favor. There's a lot of work that goes on behind this, and she starts early on. And so, thanks to Caitlin for her work on this.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Caitlin. And thank you for acknowledging that. I know that you go through a pretty extensive process to meet with all the department heads and others, as well as analyze the numbers. So we appreciate that. All right. Well, thank you again. I think we are going to move on now to item 6, which is to hear, consider, and act upon a recommendation from the Board of Finance Senior and Disabled Tax Relief Subcommittee to convene a joint committee with the RTM to consider potential changes to the senior and disabled tax relief program. Can I have a motion to put this item before us? Ms. Marmion, seconded by Mr. DeWitt. Okay. I do want to acknowledge we got an email from the Fairfield Senior Advocates in favor of the committee's recommendation. And let's see here. We have nobody in the chat, but I did get an email from Herb. Are you there? Herb, and I apologize if I pronounce your last name wrong, Lemkuler, that he wanted to make a statement.
I did, Lori, thanks. Very brief.
Thank you.
So,
please, if you would state your name and address for the record.
Sure.
Thank you.
Herb Limekuhler, Coordinating Director for Fairfield Senior Advocates. FSA is an all-volunteer advocacy group dedicated to keeping our seniors in our town and state. We've been actively involved with the BOF and RTM committees in recent reviews of the SDTR program. We believe that greater use of and possible enhancement to the current deferral program, could serve as a tool to retaining our seniors, thereby benefiting everyone's finances. The deferral program, for which there's been little recent use, has not been actively reviewed for some time. To increase deferral program use, we will need to educate residents on the program's features and demonstrate its benefit to seniors and their families. While some seniors regard their home as a means of bequeathing wealth to heirs, use of a small portion of the home's equity needed to pay property taxes can leave a substantial asset for heirs while allowing the owners to enjoy their homes and our town for a number of additional years. Beyond the deferral program, there may be some credit program administrative features that could be improved upon in the short term. Before seriously considering major changes to the credit program, an effort should be made to thoroughly evaluate use of the current credit program and how its features affect seniors' decision-making. This would not be an easy exercise, and perfect data is unavailable. However, any information that can be captured through real estate data, surveys, and other means could be useful in optimizing future decisions on that program.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate you. Appreciate your statement and appreciate you being here.
Thanks.
All right. I'm going to, before I turn this over to our colleague, Mr. DeWitt, who chaired the Senior and Disabled Tax Relief Committee, I do want to also thank our town tax assessor Ross Murray for being here. He's here to help answer any questions that may come up. I also want to note that the backup for this item begins on page 97. All right, Mr. DeWitt, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Chair, Madam Chair, I should say. I can actually share the presentation. I think I have the technology. Let's see. Let me know if you guys can see this.
We can.
You can. Great. All right. Let's make sure. So first thing, I want to thank my fellow committee members, Ms. Marmion and Mr. Curley for nominating me as chairman. I was happy to act in that capacity. The presentation that I'm giving you tonight is the presentation I gave to the committee. And it's based on what we did last time. Now, Ms. Marmion was part of the committee last time, but for for the benefit of Mr. Curley, I wanted to make sure he had this information. So as you can see, first slide, what were our goals? Our goals were to maximize the number of seniors that can take advantage of senior and disabled tax relief. That's always been the goal. regardless of who's running the committee, right? RTM or Board of Finance. We wanted to focus and maximize the benefits for the lowest income seniors in town. So you'll see in a few slides, there's brackets, there's income brackets. And we wanted to make sure that the people in those lowest income brackets were getting the most benefit. Not that we want to give any less benefit to the higher income, but we wanted to bolster the lower end of the bracket. And as good stewards of the town and the taxpayers' money, Board of Finance, we wanted to keep the senior and disabled tax relief, the taxpayer investment growth to acceptable levels, because this benefits the seniors and disabled in our town. But let's not forget that we all, as taxpayers, we all pay for this, a little bit at a time, right? So how did we accomplish our goals? Back on this committee, it was Ms. Marmion and Mr. Walsh and I. We went to the senior center and interviewed seniors. We conducted meetings with FSA. Mr. Linecooler and his team were wonderful. They were at every one of our meetings. They gave active participation. We had emails, conversations, wonderful conversations. The RTM team was not officially a team on our team, but they were at every one of our meetings, and we had active participation from the RTM. So their voices, I mean, I dare say, I think their voices were heard and were acted upon. We talked to the town tax assessor. Mr. Murray was immensely helpful in this in this pursuit here, and the CFO at the time was very helpful in making sure that this was an affordable plan that we were talking about. We created tools. We did a lot of analyzation of multiple scenarios. So, and I want to make this sure I don't want to go too crazy, right? So here's the difference. In this chart, you'll see those income brackets on the left-hand side. So that's the income bracket from low to high, right? And FY19, that column talks about the old program, and FY21 talks about the new program. So the changes in red, the red are the changes. Now, just so everyone understands, it is a state law that you even as a senior, you have to pay at the very minimum 25% of your taxes, right? So when you see in the first line that we increased the lowest income bracket from 67 to 75%, that means that we've given that range of income the maximum benefit we can give them. We cannot give them one more percentage point, a half percentage point. 75% is the maximum. And I think Mr. Murray's on. He can always, tell me if I'm wrong here. We've raised the dollar limit, so there's a percent of tax limit and there's a dollar limit, and you can see how those numbers have increased and how we increased the percentages for the lower income higher than the highest income, which were unchanged except for the dollar values. So what happened? We were actually predicting a couple less households, right? We're going to be in the program. We were going to go from 1,306 households that were eligible to 1,301. But look at the difference here. That highest income bracket, an additional 11 households were going to take advantage, right? And you'll see the lower income brackets, there's a greater increase in the lower income brackets. And that was one of our stated goals. But the big deal was the participants getting the maximum benefit were going from 109 to 230. So, I summarize it here. We actually thought we were going to get a little bit of a decrease. And Mr. Murray will tell you in no uncertain terms, this thing is a crapshoot, right? We never quite know how, what the numbers are going to be, and there's a lot of variables. But we increased the lower income eligible households, and we increased the amount of participants. We increased the largest increases for the lowest income. But here's the bad part. We were predicting at the time that the town cost was going to go from 3.32 million to 3.78. And I put on here predicted because, we don't really know until we get the tax bills. Well, you will see in another couple charts, we know the number now because Mr. Murray told us what it was. So just very quickly, when you say, well, how much benefit did we get, right? When you look at the top was the old plan, and underneath was the recommended changes. So before in the old plan, if you were in the lowest income bracket where it says averaging $13,689, if your home was assessed at $200,000, 13% of your average tax value was going to your taxes. If your house was assessed at $300,000, 22% of your income was going to your taxes. Now, look, follow that black arrow down. Under our new plan, if your house is assessed at $200,000, you've gone from paying 13% of your total income to taxes to 10%. And in the $300,000, you've gone from 22% to 15%. So that's significant. So we maximized, again, one of our goals, benefit with the lowest income brackets. And then our conclusions, and this is the slide that I presented to the Board of Finance. We're going to increase the tax burden by 14.4%, and we're going to increase the amount of participants by 111%. This data is, of course, dated, but I wanted to give a perspective on what the old committee had recommended. So how do we look today? Well, on our eligible homes, and there's those categories again, right, from the lowest to the highest, with the new tax percentage and the new dollars. Instead of that $1,301 we were predicting, in fiscal year 22, we increased to 1318. We added 17 households. So rather than losing 5, we added 17 households. So we're trending in the right direction, right? More households are getting benefit. The lower income people are getting more of the benefit than the others. And the maximum participants, I did not have the data for the presentation the other night. And Mr. Murray sent me something. That number is about the same. It's about 230. I think it's 228 now. That number has not changed. So what have we done here? So now in fiscal year 22, we've increased the overall eligible households. We've increased the participants getting the maximum amount of benefits. But here's the downside. We had predicted that is going to be 3.78 million. It really turned in at 4.078 million. So we missed the mark by 7%. Now, you could say, now this has been in effect for one whole fiscal year, and that was the last fiscal year, and we all know what happened in the last fiscal year, reevaluation. So my personal opinion is, if your house was overvalued, maybe you were eligible, or if you were overvalued, you might be eligible now, and vice versa. So that number of 4,077,768, burn that in your memory, because that's the number that's in the budget you're going to be seeing in another couple of weeks, right? That is the official senior and disabled tax number in our FY23 budget. I put this in here because when we talk about senior and disabled tax relief, and I mean anybody, right? The Board of Finance, the RTM, we always talk about getting more people involved. And Mr. Linecooler even said, he goes, maybe we should be looking at the deferral program. I don't disagree with the deferral program, right? I think it's a good program. But look at the data here. That green box on the right, last year, we added 52 households. 52 households is a lot, right? And the changes we made that possible. Now, the problem and the continuing problem is the attrition, right? So we lost 13 households due to death. We lost 30 participants because of selling. And 2 people, funny enough, under the deferral program, decided not to file anymore. So we lost 45 homes for a net increase of 7. So the increase in participation that this ordinance, bolstered, is offset by sales and unfortunately deaths. It's a harsh reality of senior and disabled tax relief. And again, I don't know if Mr. Murray's on or not, but he's the first one to tell you, it's very hard on a given day even to figure out, what what's the number going to be? We've decided to always use the June reporting for these numbers, and that's exactly what I've done. So the 3 years that are reported in here are all from the June reporting from the to the RTM. So our committee met, and with all these attributes, and I think very positive attributes, the committee voted, and the vote was it's very simple, right? The Board of Finance has to say, yes, we think that this ordinance should be reopened and analyzed by a Board of Finance and RTM combined committee, or we don't. If we thought that, everything's doing well, it's trending in the right direction, let's leave it alone for another year, then vote no. And if we thought that it should be opened again, then you'd vote yes. The vote was 2-1. I voted no. Ms. Marmion and Mr. Curley voted yes. And Ms. Charlton, if you would, when I'm done presenting, I would certainly like my other two committee members to be able to, voice their opinion on everything. But the recommendation of the committee, officially by a vote of 2-1, is to reopen the ordinance and have a joint and form a joint committee. Now I'm trying to, let me see. I want to see how I can unshare this now. Oh, here we go. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. So if I may, just give my 2 cents. We had a wonderful discussion. Ms. Marmion had the perspective of being on the committee with me last time. Mr. Curley certainly sat there and absorbed all of the information that I was willing to throw at him, which was a ton of data. For all the reasons I've mentioned, I voted no, because the program, first off, the program has literally been in effect for 1 fiscal year, right? We predicted that it was going to cost $3.78 million, cost $4 million. We've broken the $4 million barrier on senior and disabled tax relief. We've got more households, we've got more people applying. So for those reasons, I voted no, and I don't think we should reopen it. And I guess that's it. I'll leave it for my other 2 committee members to give you their opinions, and then open it up to board. So thank you for allowing me to present, Ms. Charlton, and I hand it back to you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. DeWitt. And first, let me just say thank you to you and to Ms. Marmion and Mr. Curley for, stepping up to serve on this committee, and for doing the work. I know that it was a lot of work, and we appreciate it. Ms. Marmion or Mr. Curley, do either one of you want to give some additional perspective here? Ms. Marmion. Okay. Oh,
Here we go. Sorry.
thank you.
Technical difficulties. Thank you so much. And to Chris DeWitt, thank you again for all of your hard work. Honest to God, serving on that committee with you and Mr. Walsh, you put in just an incredible amount of work. And I think, we have a debt of gratitude to you. So thank you. It was a pleasure. So I voted, as Mr. DeWitt mentioned, I voted to reopen this committee, and I did so for a number of reasons. First of all, the process, Mr. DeWitt kind of hinted at it, but the process changed. We are now, if we reopen this discussion, it will be a committee formed by both Board of Finance and RTM members. And this is a change. And one of my issues with last year was that the RTM had started out doing a ton of work. And then because we were out of compliance in terms of following the state statute, it was always supposed to be the Board of Finance that opened this and moved forward. Instead, the RTM had been opening this and then coming to the Board of Finance. And in fact, it should have been opened by the Board of Finance. So What we came to agreement on was that we would, in the future, if we agreed to open up the discussion, we would have RTM members on a joint committee. The reason this is so important is because the RTM is actually charged as a legislative body with writing ordinances, and which is what the Senior and Disabled Tax Relief ordinance, it's an ordinance. They're the legislative body. So they're charged with it. So honestly, it makes more sense for the RTM to be involved at the get-go as an equal and voting partner, if that makes sense. So I believe this process is very important. It is not to say that what we came out with during our last meetings, I'm very pleased with it. I think that we did a good job. It's more from a process standpoint. I think we should have RTM members involved, sitting at the table with a vote. And the only other thing is that Mr. DeWitt alluded to the fact that we had so much public involvement, and it was so great to hear from various organizations, including FSA, give their perspective. And what I'm concerned about is we haven't had that public, if we shut down this process now, we won't have that public comment. And I truly think that's valuable and very, very important. So for those reasons, I voted to open this process up again. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marmion. Mr. Curley?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, first off, I also want to say thank you to Chris DeWitt. The information that he shared with the subcommittee and again tonight was robust. I think he was being humble when he said that we missed the mark technically by 7%, but looking at the various components here, I thought the forecasting that was done with the last go around was quite excellent. So kudos to the previous group that did all the work, and Chris, I know you were a big part of that. So I actually think this program is working. I think it's successful, and that's not to say that it can't be further examined. And that really is what it came down to for me. I recognize that this program is not that, or at least the latest version of the program is not that mature. We've got 1 year of results to work with, but I also know that if or when this program gets reopened and reevaluated, it's not going to go into effect for the upcoming fiscal year 22-23. It's going to go, it would potentially go into effect for 23-24. And I think that's, if a subcommittee is formed, a joint subcommittee is formed, we'll have the benefit of a couple of years of results as well. Not just this last year, but this upcoming year will be taken into consideration that the year that we're about to end. So I think the point that was made at the beginning by our public speaker talked about the deferral program. I think that could be better utilized as well. But overall, I do think the results are good. This is a successful program, but I'm not necessarily a believer in if it's not broken, don't fix it. I think this is the type of program that should be reevaluated from time to time. Given the long lead time and potential changes, I thought this was the right time to take another look, as Sheila mentioned as well, with the RTM. So I'll leave it at that.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Curley. Mr. DeWitt.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Curley and Ms. Marmion, for your nice comments and your thoughts on this. A couple things just for the public to understand. And we've had a ruling from the town attorney, right? So Ms. Marmion was accurate in saying that this is an ordinance, right? So whatever we recommended, even in the last committee, the RTM can totally reject it, totally accept it. It is out of the Board of Finance's control. So if we do open this up again, what basically happens is it's, and the state statute kind of alludes to it, right? It's like the Board of Finance has the power to start the process because they realize there's something that needs to be changed, right? Much past this vote we're taking tonight, or whoever wants to participate in this committee going forward, we don't have any control. We are out of the loop. The RTM will vote. The RTM and Board of Finance combined committee will make recommendations to the RTM, and the RTM will vote this forward. So it's 100%. It's 100% under their control. That was one thing. Mr. Lime Cooler, I don't know if he's still on. I see his name, but I don't know if he's still listening or not. It's oh, there he is. Hello, Mr. Lime Cooler. Nice to see you.
Hey, Chris.
The FSA was a wonderful partner in this last effort, and Mr. Lime Cooler and all his volunteers, who, by the way, none of them are taking advantage of this, and none of them are going to, probably, right? So, kudos to that group of people for being wonderful citizen activists with us, right? Mr. Lime Cooler and I talked today, and the RTM can open this ordinance anytime they want and change the words, right? We can change the wording a little bit here and there. It's that one table. If you guys have seen it, there's one table in there that really controls the money, right? Previous to us enacting that change in the table, the RTM, actually 2 months before we voted, the RTM opened it up and made some very important changes regarding the disabled part of the legislation and other administrative changes. So I don't want to discourage a discussion at the RTM level about maybe the deferral part of this whole thing, but that one table that talks about the money is really what we really worry about. And again, the reason that I'm against it. So, Mr. Lime Cooler, I just was wondering if you wanted to reiterate what you had said to me today about the overall document.
Well, Chris, I tried to address those comments in the statement. I do believe that the deferral program has potential for us, untapped potential for us in terms of keeping our seniors. And keeping our seniors is incredibly important. We think the impact of losing a senior household, the expected cost approaches $10,000 a year, an annuity from studies that we've done. So really important to keep them. And that's something that really doesn't drain the Treasury, the deferral program, because it's a, sort of a payback of the way it's currently structured.
Right.
So, I mean, that would be my prime interest. I think there may be administrative things that could be looked at. I agree that a lot of work went into the committee did a lot of work in terms of the credit program structure. And I just would really be wary about changing that without really doing research in terms of anything we can learn about what really drives seniors' actions in terms of staying or departing. Do the program features really drive that action? Are we gaining the expected return on our investment that we're hoping for in terms of the way the program's structured? We've given it our best shot through the committee's efforts. Let's run with that until we have reason to believe that we should be changing. And that doesn't mean that we couldn't look at the credit program theoretically this year, but I think whenever we do anything like that, there needs to be some front end research to the extent we can in terms of finding out, what's really driving senior behavior.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
All right.
I'm sorry, Mr.
Sorry, Mr. DeWitt, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Lenko. And listen, my final word, really, no kidding, Madam Chair. The other thing I want you all to consider in this vote tonight is we have one of the most, if not the most robust senior and disabled tax relief in the state of Connecticut. We really do. And maybe Mr. Murray can comment. The fact that we're growing in the right direction, we're hitting all the goals, and we've got one of the best programs in the state was the reason for my no vote. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. DeWitt. Appreciate it. All right. Comments from the board. I see Mr. Mottola's hand up.
Thank you. I guess this is the Mr. Lime Cooler, and maybe Chris DeWitt or anyone wants to chime in.
I'm just gonna, members of the public can make a statement, but they're not participating as board members. So let's just have the discussion internally if we can.
Well, my question is on the deferral program, is the concern from what I heard is that it needs to be looked at again specifically, or is the concern that it's a good program or a good option, but not enough seniors are opting for it? What's the concern there? That's what I'm a little confused about. Chris, go
Mr.
ahead.
DeWitt?
Yeah, thank you. Well, that was the reason I called Mr. Limecooler today, because that's what I wanted to know. Does the FSA think that the deferral program is just horrible? No, I don't think they think it's horrible at all, right? I think and this is every part of senior and disabled tax, right? Is bringing it to as many people as possible and maybe highlighting that as an option. I personally think the deferral program is very generous. It's you have to be 75 and you can defer half of your taxes up until the point where you've gotten up to 75% of your tax burden. So and you could roll it over to a survivorship. So without speaking for the FSA in the conversations, I think the thing is not so much what it is today. It's how it's utilized and how we communicate it to the public.
And what I'm also hearing, and whoever wants to comment on this, it seems like it's important that before we consider changes to the program, that we probably need some more data, which means another year, at least one more year of the program to see how it's working. I mean, does anyone want to comment on that, or anybody on the committee or board members?
I agree with you.
Okay, Mr. Walsh, you had your hand up? Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Mr. Curley had his hand up, and as a member of the committee, I'll let him respond, and then we'll take Mr. Walsh's comment.
Yeah, I agree. More data is valuable, but my expectation is that would be that we would get an additional year of data to work with as this. I mean, we're a few months away from the end of the current fiscal year. And this joint subcommittee would work over the course of the next 15 months effectively to put something in place for the following fiscal year. So I do agree that more data is better, but we would have more than just 1 year of data.
Thank you, Mr. Curley.
Maybe Mr. Murray can answer this question. When would you need a new ordinance to be in place to implement the new statute for? I guess it would be fiscal year 24 we're talking about if there was a change?
At the very earliest, yeah.
24 at the very early.
So, Mr. Murray, can you, if you're there, can you maybe talk about the application cycle and when that occurs and when when this would have to be finalized?
So we start taking applications on February 1st, and it runs through May 15th every year. So we're in the midst of taking applications right now, and these are the applications that will affect the fiscal year 24 tax year. So you really can't make a change to the income now, and I think that's been mentioned. So it would be best to have the plan in place, at the latest in January of 23, so that when we start taking applications, we can, publicize what the program is.
Well, you would have a year from now, you'd have to have a new ordinance in place and passed.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mottola.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry. Mr. Walsh is off the screen, but I said I'd go to him if he's still available. Mr. Walsh, do you have a question? All right.
I'd rather just go to Ms. Marmion. She's a member of the committee, and we seem to be following that order. So why don't we let all the members of the committee speak first, and then the rest of us will speak.
Okay, happy to do that. Ms. Marmion?
Okay, thank you. I was basically going to reference what Mr. Curley said in terms of, we'll have more data shortly, which would help us make a decision. And something that I expressed during our meeting earlier this week was my concern was last year was somewhat of an anomaly, just because it was COVID, and it was a weird year, and people sold their houses, they left town, to get the higher market rate. So it was an anomaly, which would, kind of point to the direction of just give this ordinance more time. But on the other hand, we should be getting new data shortly, and we can take a better look at the impact. So I just wanted to bring that up. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, I lied. That wasn't my final comment. So, to Mr. Murray's point, and to Mr. Curley and Ms. Marmy's point. So July 1st, a little unrealistic, but let's say July 1st, Mr. Murray's going to have all the data and we're going to have all the data, and we'll have 2 years data. July 1st, the committee starts and they have to be done by January, right? So that's 5 months, right? No, what am I talking about? That's 6 months, 5 months. It took this committee over 6 months, right? Don't forget, the committee meets. The committee does a lot of hard work. I briefed LNA twice, and it's a month apart. And then you briefed the total RTM. So believe me, and I was wrong. It's not going to affect fiscal year 24. And Mr. Murray just made me, it's going to affect fiscal year 25, right? So to think that you're going to do this in 5 months, it's aggressive. It really is. It's a lot of work.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Curley.
Yeah, I don't disagree. It's a lot of work. If changes are going to be made, it has to be done with research and analysis. I understand the point, but what really alarms me is the disconnect between where we are today and when a potential change might go into effect. So it feels like if we push this off a year before we start again, now we're talking something that would be in effect for fiscal year 25. And it just seems like, given the long lead time that the work is going to require, together with the implementation, and when the rubber actually hits the road, it seems to me that the sooner and more frequently that we review this, the better.
Thank you, Mr. Curley. Can I just ask a clarifying question before I move on? Regarding the timing, when was the last time so we've had this new ordinance in place a year. Prior to that, how long had it been since we changed this?
2012.
Yes, that's right, Ms. Chairman.
All right.
Madam Chairman.
So I just wanted to understand the concern about waiting a year, and we need to do this, otherwise it's going to take a year. So we had gone from 2012.
7 years.
7 years. Okay.
Fiscal 12 to fiscal 19.
All right. I appreciate that. I'll have some. I think it's helpful for me to just understand, and maybe some of the other members as well, sort of what's typical here in terms of how frequently these types of ordinances get revisited, not only in our history, but for other towns as well. So we can touch more on that later. Mr. Walsh, I'll move to you.
Can you hear me?
Now we can, yes.
Okay. I'd like to thank John for his question, as usual. I sometimes have a like mind on this stuff because it's a very great question to ask about how much data do we have. I was on that committee. We met for a long time. We had many meetings, many long meetings. I've never been involved in a more inclusive meeting style in my life. When Ms. Marmion says that on regards to the process, you like to get the RTM involved. Oh, the RTM was involved. Jill Vigera was basically, she was the, I think the majority leader at the time, was basically a member of our committee. Herb was basically a member of our committee. People just jumped out and spoke whenever they want. Members of the public, we took them whenever they wanted. They just participated as though this was an open meeting. And we did lots of research. And, you know, I can't thank Mr. Murray enough for always getting us the information we wanted and the various scenarios. But to say it's, I kind of am trying to say this as nicely as possible, that to say that we're opening this thing up a year later, I find to be disingenuous to the process, to be quite honest with you, because we do not, as Mr. Mottola asked for information, we do not have the information. Matter of fact, all the information we have is either great that we have more participation, or for the taxpayers that have to absorb the cost of this, not great information actually, because we went up. We were kind of predicting, and when we were planning this, we wanted it to go up by 13.8%. It took a hit to the Fairfield taxpayers that it went up 22% over that 7-year period from 2012 to when we adopted it. 22% it went up. Now, where does that 22% increase come from? This $4 million. I'll tell you, one of the areas is going to come from the school children of this town. The town side runs extremely lean right now. I think any of us who look at it will know that it runs extremely lean. So when we try to hit certain tax rates, and I think we should have predictable tax rates in this town, there's only one place it can really come from: the Board of Education. And I don't think that's where it should come from. I mean, I thought it was pretty generous that we went up by 14%. And I supported that. And I supported my main goal and what I argued, and the other committee members will argue. There was many people who argued, and Ms. Figueroa was one of them, that this should apply across everybody. Everybody, we should expand it, and all sorts of people on all income levels should have more access to senior tax relief. Kind of as though we were heading in a direction where seniors don't pay taxes in this town. That was kind of her theory. One of the members, and I think many of the other two members that I had the honor to serve with, quickly were able to decide that senior tax relief should go to our most needy. That more money should go to our most needy and deserving taxpayers in this town, our most deserving seniors. If you really want tax relief, and the underlying thing that they always try to sell you on tax relief is, oh, you got to keep seniors in town because they give you more bang for your buck. And that's great. I love that. And I also think they should stay because our grandparents of kids in this town should stay. And if you grew up in this town and paid taxes your whole life, I think you should stay in this town. And I personally want you to stay in this town. But where you're going to get the most bang for your buck is these people who are only getting Social Security. There are people in this town making $12,000 a year trying to pay their taxes. And I and some of my other members wanted to put more money to those people and have it scale down as we go up. And I think that we've done a good job with that. And that's what our focus on that last committee was. But unanticipated was that the participation included a lot more people, which is great. But it also drove the cost up to 22%. And I don't know whether that was just 1 year. I don't know if it's going to go up more next year or not, or anything like that. But in any of these plans, any of these ordinances come back, I don't know one other ordinance in this town that comes back to the town every single year automatically. It does. But we should be looking at numbers, as Mr. Mottola alluded to. Where is the data? And we should be looking at it not over 1 year. We should be looking at it over 5 years. We're a 300 and something $million corporation, and I don't know any finance department that would make a change and just look at 1 year data and then look at it next year and next year and next year again when you made a major change like this. So I think we're doing a disservice to the taxpayers by opening this up. We've got to let this mature. How did this work out? As Herb said very eloquently, we need to see whether there's a return of investment, because we all agreed on our committee that we should be trying to keep seniors in town. We are not going to get that over a year. There could be anomalies in a given year. This should be done over time. I honestly believe it shouldn't be looked at personally, at least until 5 years have gone by. So we have 5 years of data to see where we are. And to be honest with you, we have the best senior tax relief system in the state of Connecticut. And now people want to make it better without any reasoning, and there's not going to be a lot of data to go on. 1 year, 2 years, it is not enough. Having been inside that data, you need a lot of years to figure out what's going on. So I was really hoping the committee was going to come back and tell me here what I think, which was I didn't think there was going to be enough data after 1 year to reopen this. Could we just get 3, 4, 5 years of data so we could properly look at this and come up with a solution if one's even needed? I mean, if the real goal is it keeping seniors in town, 1 year is not going to tell you that. These things, Mr. Murray can allude to it. There's years they try to reach out to people. They've tried all sorts of things to try to get more people on here who they think are qualified. But you just don't know, because you know why? Because people move out of this town and we have no idea from 1 year to the next why the number went down. Is it because they track people who died through the probate court? But people move into nursing homes. People move in with their family because they can't live alone anymore. People just leave all the time. People go to Florida, decide that they don't like the tax structure in Connecticut anymore. And they don't tell you when they leave what the reason is they're leaving. You need a greater amount of data to track this. And the one data point that concerns me is that, wow, in 1 year we went up by 22%. What's it going to go up next year? And we're in some tight times. We all know that the Board of Ed has a big increase. And special ed stuff, it's very concerning. I think some of it's definitely needed, but it's very concerning where those numbers are going. And I just don't think, I think that we should take the responsibility as this board to just end this tonight for this year. I'm not saying not have it go change again, but let's have there be data. I think we owe this to the taxpayer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Walsh. Mr. Testani.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just want to highlight a couple things. Both Mr. Walsh, Mr. DeWitt, I think even to a certain extent, Ms. Marmon and Mr. Curley alluded to. Aside the cost, let's take the cost aside just for a minute, which, as we know, is over $4 million now from what Mr. DeWitt was saying. But I think one of the key pieces we all need to remember is that it was alluded to many times that this program is not the richest, certainly one of the richest in the state of Connecticut. So just that one piece alone should reassure our residents and our seniors and those that participate in the Senior and Disabled Tax Relief Program that the program that has been implemented is, let's just say it's the best or the top 3 in the state of Connecticut. And that once, as Mr. Walsh was just indicating, more data has been accumulated, if it's worth reopening it, for lack of a better phrase, at that point, I certainly would be supportive. But at this point, when you combine the costs and the fact that what is favorable to the seniors and the disabled tax relief program is so favorable. There's no reason or data, as we've alluded to many times, to have to change it at this point. So I would be a no vote as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Testani. Are there any other board members who haven't weighed in yet that want to ask a question here or make a statement? I don't know, Ms. Leclerc or Mr. Stark, if you have anything. No obligation. Oh, I see Mr. Mottola again.
Oh, are we, this is in the back of my mind somewhere. Are we obligated under the statute to look at this every 2 years? There's nothing?
So I see Mr. DeWitt responding. Do you want to respond to that, Mr. DeWitt?
Yep. There's no time restriction. It's just when the board of finance of the town feels it's in the best interest to open it.
Was it the subcommittees, when it would be obviously the prior subcommittee, not the current one, was there a discussion from the committee that when the Board of Finance should look at this, was there a consensus that every 2 years, 3 years, we should at least take a look to see if we want to refer this over to the RTM? Was there any consensus on that or nothing to that effect?
No, and I think Mr. Walsh has a comment too, but no, the way we left the last committee, right, was Ms. Marmion was actually very vocal about the fact that, we gotta let this sit for a little while, let this thing sit and marinate a little bit and figure out what the numbers are, right? But there was no consensus on a time period. But I agree with Mr. Walsh's comments. This isn't something you want to play around with every year. It takes a lot of resources, it takes a lot of volunteer resources, Board of Finance, RTM, and believe me, it takes a lot of resource from Mr. Murray as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Mr. Walsh, you had a follow-up comment?
Yeah, John, the RTM ordinance required they could do it once a year. They had to look at it once a year. And they've set up a committee every year until they figured out that there's a state statute says that if you want to do that, you have to have the Board of Finance approve that it can be done, that there can be a committee set up. So that became a stumbling block. And I thought, okay, this is good. So we all went through this. We all spent a lot of time. The three of us spent a lot of time with everybody. Ms. Vigera has a lot of information. She studied it and she's opinionated about it, which is great. It really is great. And she was very helpful to our committee. I will say that. However, it doesn't mean that it should be done every year. And I know that we talked on our committee about it being like, should we change it? Should the ordinance be changed to not do it every year? And we decided that, well, maybe on the Board of Finance, we realize, and Ms. Marmy, I think you were one of the supporters of this, that we didn't have to do this every year at the time when we were talking about this, just like Mr. DeWitt had said. And it shouldn't be done every year. We need to collect data. I mean, this is something that should not be done on a yearly basis. But that seems to be where we're going right now, if we pass this. And I think it would be disappointing and to look at it every single year. We've had a major change. Let it, won't use Mr. DeWitt's term or Marmion's term, marinate for a while, so we get the data to properly be able to look at it maybe in 5 years and say, hey, how's that? How did that work out? Did we keep people here? Did it work that we kept people here? Is it enough now? Where do our finances stand for the town of Fairfield? Do we have resources more that we could throw at this? So, that's a long answer, John, to a short question you had. But the RTM ordinance is that a committee be formed every year.
Thank you.
That's what
Are you're done, Mr. Mottola? Okay. I actually have a question for Mr. Murray, but I also want to maybe react a little to what Mr. Walsh said. I do very much agree that data is important to understand how the program is working. And I think 1 year is not enough data. And I think Ms. Marmion did mention, and I think it's an important point, you know, the 1 year we do have was sort of a COVID year, and we're not really sure what that means in terms of, you know, participation, how many people might have moved, whatever. I'm not sure I would put a time limit on it, as Mr. Walsh suggested. I don't know that it's necessarily 5 years. There might be other things other than time that matter. You know, if there's a change in the, you know, federal tax laws that, you know, impacts, you know, something that then impacts the formula, that might be a trigger to look at it. I don't think we've had that since this ordinance was put into place. You know, if the data we do have, even if it was 2 years of data, showed us something alarming in the pattern in terms of a significant drop off in terms of participation, I think that would be a legitimate reason to, you know, want to look at this. I don't see that that's happened. But one of the things I really want to understand a little bit better is the benchmarking of our plan and how we compare to other communities. I actually, I briefly spoke to the first select woman on Friday, and in her budget letter, she made a statement that we have one of the most expansive senior and disabled tax relief programs in the state. And I asked her what the data was supporting that statement. You know, just help me understand, what does that mean? What are we comparing to, and where does that come from? So this was, I think, on, you know, late in the week, and yesterday was a holiday. So I know this isn't in the backup. We can get it posted, but I think all the board members did get some data that Mr. Murray put together to attempt to answer that question. And although some of the information is a little bit dated, it does give, I think, some helpful information to understand where Fairfield stands in relation to some other towns, specifically in terms of the type of options we have in our program, you know, the percentages of people that are participating, the maximum credits we provide, the total cost. I thought there was just some really good information in there. So I wanted to throw out the question to Mr. Murray. And, you know, given that we just did get this information right before the meeting, can you maybe help the board understand that aspect of this? How do we compare to other communities? Is this truly, you know, one of the best programs in the state, and you know, and in what respects is that true?
Sure. Yeah, the information is that I provided is a bit dated. There was a report done by the state from 2015, and there was a CCM information gathering that was requested by Representative Vergara back around 2018 that compared several similar towns to Fairfield. And, you know, without a doubt, Fairfield probably has the most generous program. Certainly the amount of the benefit that's given out is, I believe, the highest. There are some towns that offer a higher income limit, but typically those towns will have a much lower benefit amount, and or they're a much smaller town, so their total cost is in the hundreds of thousands, not in the millions.
Okay. Any other takeaways from this data that you want to highlight for us?
Not from this data, but I will mention something that came to mind. We have not taken renewal applications in 2 years because of COVID. So we have, you know, a lot of applicants that have not had to come in and have not had to renew. So we will be seeing the first group of those this year, and then next year the other group, because only half the applicants apply every year. So, you know, COVID has impacted that aspect of the program. So it's a bit of an unknown how that affected, you know, what we're going to see in the reapplications and how that's affected people actually wanting to apply brand new.
Okay. Thank you for that. Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, the information you refer to, you know, I mean, I've reviewed that back in the day of the committee, and for those who haven't looked at it, there's a couple overwhelming things. So Mr. Murray hit a lot of good points. A lot of communities are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. We are literally millions. Some of the communities do indeed have a much higher income cap or range, but a lot of them cap. I think it's Glastonbury, right? They cap the funding. So if you have a household of 2 people, you get $1,250. If you're a household of 1, you get $1,000. We don't do that. We do it by percentages. And remember, I told everyone that by law, you got to pay 25% of your taxes no matter what, right? We're maxing out in that upper range, as Mr. Walsh said, the most deserving range, 75%. We're giving the maximum amount of that by law, by state law, we can give to those people in that, and that's a couple hundred households in town. So, you know, in a lot of these, and I also talked about, there's those income ranges. A lot of these programs don't go to that kind of really painful detail to make sure that you're in an income range and a house assessment, that one chart I put up. So, I really love everyone to see it, and it's really my fault. I should have provided this because it's great information, even though it's dated. But I got to tell you, it's just in the overall impact. When you read this document, you will certainly go, I can't believe how great the senior and disabled tax relief is in Fairfield. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. DeWitt. Any other comments from the board? Okay. If there are no comments, I think we can move forward to a vote. I just would ask that everyone please make themselves visible with their camera. Ms. LeClaire, I don't think we can see you there, just so that I can count the vote. Mary, are you there? All right, hang on for a minute, folks. Okay, I can't seem to, I don't see Ms. LeClaire there. Let me just give her a minute to get back to us so that we can actually have a full accounting. Until then, does anyone have any other questions on this? Sorry, guys.
Thank you for waiting.
Anyone ever can text her or something? Oh.
I have done that, and
okay.
She must have stepped away for a moment, so let me just give her a moment. I am not sure what to do here, folks. I can wait a couple more minutes, or we can take a brief break. I'm going to give Ms. LeClaire just another minute. I did try to call her also, but she went to voicemail. So let's hang on a minute. Apologies.
Take a bio break.
I'd be in favor of a restroom break.
Minutes?
Okay, do we need a motion for that?
No, we don't.
We don't? All right, why don't we give
We
ourselves?
need a motion to take a recess.
All
Mr.
right,
Chair.
Mr. Testani, you want to make that motion?
Sure.
And I will second it. All right, all in favor? Okay, let's reconvene in, let's give ourselves 10 minutes just to be on the safe side. Thanks. That we know that Mary's device died and she's in the process of signing back in. We'll just continue to wait until she can get back to us.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I realized today that we should have put on this meeting, it'll have to be next meeting, to make a motion to dissolve our existing committee.
Okay.
So we can do that the next, I know I see March 1st got canceled. Thank you for that note today. So maybe
Yeah,
we can do it. We can do it the next quarterly. I mean, it's not like we're going to meet or anything. So
Right. Yeah, March 1st is not officially canceled. We have to get that cancellation notice out, but that is
Okay.
the intent, yes, because we don't have any business coming before us.
just something to think about. We do have to officially, because you officially created it, so you officially got to kill it now
Okay.
or dissolve it. I guess is a better word, right?
Dissolve it.
Someone on the town side there might call for us gave Miss Leclerc just about a minute ago, the telephone number that's on our agenda and the meeting code number, the password, I guess. And
Okay.
I just want to make sure they're going to let her talk, like to get through. So I don't know
Yeah, I think she'll be,
if there's a different number, maybe somebody from the town.
yeah, I think if she dials *6, she can, if she is muted, she'll be able to speak. And so we'll have to do a voice vote if that's the case. But Jim, you said she's in process of doing that?
Yeah.
Okay.
She's having problems with her computer, so now I called her and gave her from the top of our agenda, the telephone number and the access code. But I just want to make sure the town's not going to keep her muted.
Yeah.
When she calls in. So, because like a member of the public or something during our deliberations.
No, I understand. Yeah, she might have had a Wi-Fi problem or something, so. And I appreciate everyone's patience.
See a call-in user 8. I don't know if that was there before. I don't know if anybody else can see it on the black boxes. Call-in user 8. So is there someone from the town who's on this call that can?
Okay, I'm just getting message here.
Same thing you said, just *6, I think.
I don't see her. I see her name on here, but it doesn't say mute or unmute. So I don't know if she's signed in or if this is from her last sign in.
I think what's the blank box there is with her name is from her last sign in. So if she's trying to dial in, then she will come in separately and she can hit *6 to be heard. So.
Dave Kelly, can you hear?
Yeah, Dave.
I'm sorry, this is Prue. Dave is doing the RTM meeting, so you got me.
Okay. Prue, are you able to enable Miss Leclerc if she needs to speak?
I think that I can unmute her,
Okay.
so I will try it once she gets on. But like I said, this other sign on that's here, it's not showing me anything except her name.
Yeah, and we don't know who the call-in user is, right?
Let's see.
We have a new.
No, but they're unmuted anyway, whoever it is.
Okay. All right, guys, we're going to give this 3 more minutes till 10:10, and then we're going to go ahead and vote if Mary is not able to get back.
So Mr. Dave Kelly just texted me and said as long as she presses *6, she should be able to unmute. So
Okay.
Madam Chair, I'm assuming there's no other public comment that we could take in the
No,
right?
no, no one's asked to make comment. First time for everything.
Chair.
Yes, Mr. Walsh?
I've got Mary on the phone and she says it's asking her, even though she's following the directions at the top of our agenda, it's asking her for another access code. Another one, like a second one. She puts the first one in and accepts it and asks for another. The question she has is if I put her on speakerphone, would you accept that for a vote?
Yeah, if we take a voice vote, we can do that.
Okay, Mary, can you hear everything here? Okay.
Okay, I know Mary's voice, so, all right, guys. Thanks everyone for their patience. Now everyone get back on the screen. Chris, Kevin.
Madam Chair, I think we actually need a vote to reconvene.
Agree, but I just want to make sure everyone's back so we can do that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We missing anybody? Okay, I think we have all of us.
Madam Chair, if you could just explain to Ms. Leclerc where we stand right now, or if you want, I will. You know, what we're doing.
Yeah, well, okay, well, first, can I have a motion to come out of our recess, please? Mr. DeWitt, seconded by Mr. Testani. Okay, Ms. Leclerc is joining us by phone. Mr. Walsh, did you want to provide an update?
Mary, we're voting on our item. I don't know what item number it is, but it's regards to whether to approve a committee. I think it's item number 6, to approve a committee for senior tax relief and whether one should be established or not.
Okay.
You're aware of that item, correct, Ms. Leclerc?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Discussion.
Okay.
All right. So all in favor of convening a joint committee with the RTM to consider potential changes to the senior and disabled tax relief program, please say aye and also raise your hand. Mr. Curley,
Aye.
Mr. Stark, Ms. Marmion. Opposed?
Aye.
Mr. DeWitt, Mr. Testani, Mr. Walsh, Mr. Matola, Ms. Leclerc, Ms. Charlton. Okay, the motion fails 6-3. Right, thank you, everyone. And I appreciate, again, I appreciate everyone's patience as we work through our technical issues here. I'm sure it won't be the last time. I hope my Wi-Fi doesn't go down during one of the meetings, but if it does, you know, I hope everybody's patient with me too. So thank you again, everyone. I appreciate that. And once again, I do want to very much thank the Senior and Disabled Tax Relief Committee for all of their work. And you know, for getting us through this. All right, so we are going to now move on to item 7, which is to hear, consider, and act upon the draft minutes of December 7th, 2021, 7 p.m., January 4th, 2022, January 18th, 2022, and February 1st, 2022. Can I have a motion to put this item before us? Mr. DeWitt, seconded by Ms. Marmion. All right, just a word to the board. The backup includes the original December 7th minutes that were put before us on January 4th and tabled at that meeting. Those are on page 106, as well as the revised minutes that were put before us on February 1st. Those are on page 112 of the backup. And as before, the revised minutes have the changes highlighted. During our February 1st meeting, we had a discussion as to whether we could consider and act upon the December minutes because they'd been tabled and not taken up at the next meeting. And you'll all recall I agreed to get the town attorney's opinion on how to move forward. I did speak to Attorney Baldwin last Thursday, and it's his opinion that it's appropriate for us to consider and act upon these minutes from December, notwithstanding the procedural error that occurred in tabling versus postponing them. It's his view that the motion to table instead of postpone was a misnomer The intent to reconsider the minutes after the secretary reviewed them was clear. That Robert's rules, while they govern the conduct of our meetings, are not so prescriptive and determinative as to, force us into something that doesn't make any sense. And that in this case, there's a clear interest to the town in having approved minutes. I did not ask Attorney Baldwin to put his opinion in writing or to be here, but if any board member wants to chat with him for further clarification, you can reach out to him through yourself, through me. But in any event, we're going to go ahead to consider and act on these minutes tonight. Okay, so for December 7th, and we'll take these up one at a time, we're going to use as a starting point the revised minutes that begin on page 112. And if anyone wants to make an motion to amend those minutes, go ahead and we can discuss it and vote. Any comments on the December 7th minutes? Mr. Walsh.
Are you taking them as amended with the new language in them, or are you just the December 7th minutes right now? Are you asking for people to make amendments right now?
So, yeah, so we're using as a starting point the last set that we received, which were revised. And if you want to object to the additions that were made, you can make a motion to eliminate those changes, but we're going to just use those as a starting point. I think that's the easiest thing to do.
Well, those haven't even been moved as a change. I mean, we had the minutes proposed. No one's even made a motion to amend those. So I don't see how they even get before us.
All right, so we just had a motion to put them before us. I don't want to get into a procedural squabble. If we want to make another amendment, we can do that. But my recommendation is that we start with those minutes that we last discussed. And if there's any, those are the, it's not clear what minutes we started with. Minutes got tabled, the motion died. So as far as I'm concerned here, we're sort of starting fresh. So let's start with the minutes as revised. They're highlighted, and we can take any comments from there.
Okay. Well, I'd like to discuss those minutes that are before us.
All right. Do you have a motion? Do you want to make a motion?
I'd first like to talk about those minutes. So that's the motion. If these minutes are now before us, correct?
These minutes are before us.
So I'd like to discuss those minutes.
All right, go ahead.
Okay. So, and some of this is covered in our January 4th minutes. And some of this was discussed by our recording secretary at our February 1st meeting. Because what we discussed was, and I'll read it out of the minutes of the January 4th meeting, is that Ms. Marmion made a motion to table the minutes of the December 7th, 21, 7 p.m. meeting. So recording secretary Prue O'Brien can listen to the recording and add comments regarding the Gould Manor project to reflect the detailed discussion regarding the request for extra funding. And then Craig Curley seconded that motion. And that motion passed 6-3. Then when we had our February 1st meeting, and you go to the minutes of that, that's not what happened. Prue did not go back to change the minutes or to add specificity at all. Prue states at that meeting, before all of us who were there, rightfully so, that she had a conversation with Miss Marmion, and that Miss Marmion wanted to go back and listen to the meeting, and she did. And then she got a call from Miss Marmion, where Miss Marmion told her what minutes to put in, which is improper, to be quite honest with you, because it's not what we had agreed to during our meeting, number one. And number two, it's not proper under Robert's rules to do it that way. And I did talk to, after you spoke to Attorney Baldwin, I spoke to him as well. And we discussed under Robert's rules the different roles of our secretaries. So basically, Ms. Marmion is a correspondence secretary. And Prue is our recording secretary. And under Robert's rules, which I'll read to you now, a couple of things. Under secretary, which is under section 47 of Robert's rules, and I'm reading out of the 10th edition of Robert's rules. The secretary is the recording officer of the assembly and the custodian of its records, except those specifically assigned to others, such as the treasurer's books. The recording officer is sometimes called the clerk, the recording secretary, the recorder, or the scribe. So Prue acts as the recording secretary. So really they're her minutes. They're not Miss Marmion's minutes. So there's another section of Robert's rules to follow on the page. It talks about what the roles of the corresponding secretary is. And I'll read that verbatim. In large societies and other organizations, the duties of issuing notices of the meeting and the course conducting the general correspondence of the organization as described under item 9 on page 43, or excuse me, 443, are frequently assigned to a separate elected officer, usually called the corresponding secretary. That's what Ms. Marmion is. When there is a corresponding secretary, the unqualified word secretary used alone refers to the recording secretary. So basically, Prue is our recording secretary, and she's the secretary. So those are her minutes. And as Attorney Baldwin, and we can get him in for a further meeting, has stated that the corresponding secretary, Ms. Marmion, has no authority over the minutes more than any other member, meaning that they have to be moved by her if she wants to amend the meeting minutes. And that's something we've got to get down and understand from here on out. And Ms. LeClaire served as the same type of secretary, the corresponding secretary, as Ms. Marmion did for many years. Ms. LeClaire, did you ever change minutes on your own?
Don't believe so, no.
Okay. So, in essence, anything that Ms. Marmion wanted to add, the verbiage she chose to add, that's now before us, has to be done by a motion to amend. And I'm not saying that we can't amend the minutes. We can. So we can amend the minutes even after the meeting, even after they're approved. But it's got to be done by motion. So she has no further control over the minutes more than any other member here. Because Prue's actually the one recording it and taking the minutes down. And they don't have to be done with great specificity. And I personally believe Prue's done a great job, actually. And as I've told you in other meetings, I don't want to pound the fact any further. I thought we should use Prue's
Mr.
minutes.
Walsh, I'll take your point. So if that's the issue, why don't we can go back to the original minutes on page 106, and we can let Ms. Marmion, if she so wishes, make a motion to amend by making a motion to make those changes that she previously did before. Is that okay with everybody?
That's okay with me.
All right, so let's start with the original minutes. Do we have any motions on those original minutes? Ms. Marmion, are you going to make a motion? Okay. Second? Okay, Mr. Curley. Okay, Ms. Marmion, go ahead.
Thanks so much. I would like to make a motion to amend the original minutes of December 7th in I have two amendments, but I'll take the first one first. So, and I apologize, I don't have page numbers, but under the paragraph that starts, Mr. Bremer said the original amount of 945,000. Are you with me?
Yes.
I recommend adding an additional paragraph. That paragraph would read, various board members noted the change in scope from the original Gould Manor Park presentation made to the Board of Finance at the June 2021 meeting, including the addition of a pickleball court and a scoreboard. Mr. Bremer and Mr. Calabrese noted that discussions related to the pickleball court and scoreboard were part of the original discussions held during the June 2021 Board of Finance meeting. That's my first, I do have a second addition. I don't know if you want me to take it.
Go ahead. Yep.
I have a second recommended amendment, and that would come after this paragraph. Chris DeWitt made a motion to reconvene the BOF special meeting at 9:20 p.m. Jim Walsh seconded the motion, which carried unanimously. My suggested amendment is as follows, and I'm going to read it to you. Ms. Charlton noted that discussions and debates over what was and was not originally discussed and proposed as part of the Gould Manor Park remediation project could be avoided if the board were provided with detailed project backup, including descriptions and cost estimates. She noted that the original Gould Manor Park backup from the June Board of Finance meeting lacked specificity and that this was a bad process. Mr. DeWitt suggested that future proposals include the 14-point description format the board has received for other projects. And that's the end of the suggested amendment.
Okay. And we can vote on, Mr. DeWitt, did you have a comment before we vote on the amendment?
Yes, please. I would like I'd like the last sentence of that, which starts with Mr. DeWitt suggested that future proposals include the 14-point. Can we consider that separately, please? And I will make an additional motion after you vote on the other two to add that to the minutes.
So you're suggesting that we strike that sentence from
Ms. Marmion's recommendation, and I'll make a motion independently of that.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Madam Chair, just a point of clarification. I believe Ms. Marmion would then have to amend her motion.
Yes, you are right,
Yeah.
Mr. Testani. So Ms.
So
Marmion?
I would, thank you very much. I would like to amend my motion's amendment, which is the second paragraph, to exclude the following sentence. Mr. DeWitt suggested that future proposals include the 14-point description format the board has received for other projects.
Okay. All right. So can we vote on this amendment? All right. All those in favor of the amendment to the minutes that Ms. Marmion proposed, please say aye. Ms. Marmion, Mr. Mottola, Mr. Curley, Mr. Stark, Ms. Charlton, Mr. Walsh.
Is the amendment correct?
This is the amendment.
To take it separately.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay.
I'm sorry. The amendment. I'm confused now. The amendment to remove based on my comment.
No, we're voting on we just voted on Ms. Marmion's revised amendment that included the that excluded the last sentence.
Okay, got it. And
So
what was the vote? Sorry.
just to be clear, okay. I think I got those in favor. Opposed? Mr. DeWitt, opposed? Anyone else? Okay. Abstain? Anyone abstain? Okay. I didn't hear Ms. LeClaire.
I'm sorry, I was muted. I was muted for Mary, so I apologize.
All right, Mr. Walsh, can you just clarify how you voted, please?
I voted in favor.
In favor, okay. And Mr. Testani voted in favor?
Yes, as long as, and again, just for clarification, we're voting just on the amendment to remove
the sentence Mr. DeWitt wants removed, correct?
No, we were voting on Ms. Marmion's amendment, which
Oh,
excluded the last sentence. So she clarified that her amendment excluded the last sentence. So that's what we're voting on.
Okay, then I apologize. I'm a no vote then.
You're a no vote. Okay. So to be clear, in favor, Ms. Charlton, Ms. Marmion, Mr. Mottola, Mr. Curley, Mr. Stark. Opposed was Mr. Testani and Mr. DeWitt. Mr. Walsh, did you oppose as well? Okay. And I don't hear Ms. Leclerc.
Mary, can you say it again louder? Can you hear her?
No, I cannot.
Okay. Mary, say it a little louder. Can you hear that?
Okay. I can't hear her. I think that we may have to, Ms. Leclerc is probably going to have to join the meeting if she can to vote on the minutes. You know, this is.
Can you hear me?
Now we can, yeah.
Say it again, Mary. Say it one more time, Mary.
I oppose. It's Mary Leclerc.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. So the motion, so the amendment passes 5-4. Okay.
The previously added comment, second comment, after the paragraph that ends with, and that was a bad process, I'd like to add the statement, Mr. DeWitt suggested that future proposals include the 14-point description format the board has received for other projects in the past.
Okay. Do we have a second for that amendment? Ms. Marmion. Okay. All in favor for that amendment? Okay, we have Ms. Charlton, Mr. Walsh, Ms. Marmion, Mr. Mottola, Mr. DeWitt, Mr. Curley, Mr. Stark. Opposed? Mr. Testani?
Hey, which way are you voting? Can you hear that?
No, I cannot.
Mary Leclerc.
Say it one more time, loud and clear.
I vote yes.
Okay. All right. So that the amendment passes 8-1. Okay. Anything else on these minutes? Mr. Walsh.
I'd like to make two amendments. They're a little bit different. I was going to read them all together, but just for clarity. The first one is an amendment to add the following language. The contractors that contaminated our fields and did not properly perform the work were hired by Fairfield American Little League. The Flato and Tetro administrations did not require any type of performance bond or surety bond, which would have allowed the town to recover sums for the improper work we are paying for with this bond before us, period. That's my first amendment.
Can you read that again? Can you repeat that, Mr. Walsh?
Sure. Can I just clarify, Mr. Walsh, before you repeat it? Are you saying you made that statement during the meeting?
Yeah, you can see it. It's talked about it. The 1 hour, 11 minutes and 5 second mark on the Fair TV broadcast.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. Ms. Marmion, did you want that repeated?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind rereading that, please.
Sure. Now, I'm not saying that's a direct quote. That's the sum and substance of what I said. I did not, just like our minutes, I'm not saying that that was a direct quote. That's what I started talking about at the 1 minute and 11 minute, 1 hour, 11 minute and 5 second.
Understand. Okay, thank you.
The contractors that contaminated our fields and did not properly perform the work were hired by Fairfield American Little League. The Flato and Tetro administrations did not require any type of performance bond or surety bonds, which did not allow the town of Fairfield to recover sums for the improper work we are paying for with the bond before us.
I'll
Okay.
second.
All right. Just a minute, Mr. Testani. Mr. Walsh, do you want to read your other amendments before we vote?
Do that if you want, or, I can.
Yeah, I think that would that would probably be easiest. Okay.
Sure. The second motion for amendment was new bathrooms are necessary for various recreational uses, including 2 baseball fields, tennis, fishing, and ice skating. Hundreds and hundreds of people attend this field on a weekly basis, period. Bathrooms, the bathrooms need to be replaced as part of this project, period. Let's see. Little League Baseball has been a pride of our town for more than 10 years after sending multiple teams to the Little League World Series, period. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Is that it for your,
And once again, that is a summary of a discussion
Understood.
and points that I made at the 1 hour, 14 minute and 39-second minute mark of the Fair TV broadcast.
okay.
I'll second that motion, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Testani. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor of Mr. Walsh's amendment to the minutes? Please say aye. Ms. Charlton? Mr. Walsh, Mr. DeWitt, Mr. Mottola, Ms. Marmion, Mr. Testani, Mr. Curley, Mr. Stark, and is that a yes from Ms. Leclerc?
Go ahead, Mary.
I vote yes.
Okay, okay. All right, so that, so the amendment was carried unanimously. All right, any other discussion or amendment on these minutes? Okay. All right, so can we then have a motion to approve the amended minutes of the December 7th, 7 p.m. meeting? Mr. DeWitt, second. Do we have a second? Mr. Mottola. Okay, all in favor of approving the amended minutes? All right, Ms. Charlton, Mr. Walsh, Mr. DeWitt, Mr. Mottola, Ms. Marmion, Mr. Testani, Mr. Curley, Mr. Stark.
Mary Leclerc.
And Ms. Leclerc. Okay, it is unanimous. Okay, those minutes are approved. Hallelujah. All right, let's move on.
I have nightmares about those minutes, Larry.
All right, what I'm having nightmares about is I have so many papers here that I've got to find my agenda again. All right, let's move now to the minutes of January 4th, 2022. These are already before us from our original motion. So do we have any discussion or comments on the January 4th minutes? Mr. Walsh.
Okay, I have the following amendment. I'll try to go slow so everyone can understand it. And then I have minute marks if people want to know the minute marks. So there was, and this is in this section talking about, there's a section in the minutes towards the bottom under this section where we're talking about what we're going to be doing. So wherever you see fit to put this, I'm fine with it. Okay. There was a lively discussion of Miss Marmion seeking to table the recording secretary's minutes of this meeting, period. Miss Marmion said she wanted a more balanced minutes of this meeting, period. Mr. Walsh advised the board that Robert's rules only requires taking attendance, recording motions, and votes, period. Mr. Walsh stated that we had always in the past followed the recording secretary's minutes, period. Mr. Walsh stated that he does not want verbatim minutes, period. If anybody wanted to see the details of the meeting, they can watch the entire recording of every meeting either on Fair TV or on YouTube, period. Mr. Walsh and Mr. Testani both separately stated that they thought that the minutes for this matter were getting political, and it shall have, and it should never have been this way, period. That's it.
I'll second that motion, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you, Mr. Testani. Comments from the board? Mr. Curley.
Yeah, I have no objection to the comments that Jim suggested. I think that's all accurate. But I'm not sure where they go. I think the motion has to be specific as to where it goes.
Mr. Walsh, you'll clarify your
I'm
amendments?
pulling it up right now. Hold on a second. So on those minutes, let's see. It's in item 5, and there is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So in paragraph 6, which starts off as Ms. Marmion made a motion to table the minutes of the 12/7/21 7 p.m. meeting. So recording secretary Prue O'Brien can listen to the recording and add comments regarding the Gould Manor project. Basically at the bottom of that paragraph.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Okay, so we have that amendment, and we have a second on the amendment. Are we ready to vote on the amendment? Okay, all those in favor of Mr. Walsh's amendment? Okay, Mr. Walsh, Mr. DeWitt, Mr. Mottola, Ms. Marmion, Mr. Testani, Mr. Curley, Mr. Stark, Ms. Charlton, and Ms. Leclerc. Okay, that is unanimous. Anything else on these minutes? Okay. Good. Let's go ahead and vote then. Can I have a motion to approve the January 4th, 2022 minutes inclusive of the amendments we just approved? Mr. Walsh, seconded by Mr. Testani. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, I see everyone, and I just want to clarify, Ms. Leclerc. Okay, it is unanimous. All right. Thank you. All right, let's move on. The next minutes are for January 18th, 2022. Any comments on those minutes? All right. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes for January 18th, 2022? Mr. DeWitt, seconded by Mr. Walsh. All in favor? Okay, Mr. Walsh, Mr. DeWitt, Mr. Mottola, Ms. Marmion, Mr. Testani, Mr. Curley, Mr. Stark, Ms. Leclerc? Ms.
Say it one more
Leclerc
time.
is an aye. Ms. Charlton abstains. I was not at that meeting. The motion carries, or the minutes are approved. 8-0 with one abstention. Okay, thank you. All right.
Great display of bipartisanship there, Ms. Chair.
What's that?
That was a great display of bipartisanship right there.
All right, February 1st.
Ms. Charlton,
Yes.
you and I had a discussion about minutes offline, and I mean these minutes and stuff. And I think what we've kind of learned is that if we want to make a motion, we should be, we'll all be ready.
Yeah,
So that you can just
absolutely.
read it into the record, correct?
Jim, I think it's fair to say we're not gonna postpone or table any minutes anymore, okay?
No,
We're
no,
just
yeah,
gonna
no, but I
get
think we should all just be on the same page. You should have it
Yes.
written out so we can read it in and move as quickly as we just did. When we
Agreed.
finally got to it.
Absolutely agreed. Okay, February 1st, 2022. Any comments on these minutes? Okay, seeing none. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes of February 1st, 2022? Mr. DeWitt, seconded by Mr. Stark. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Ms. Charlton, Mr. Walsh, Mr. DeWitt, Mr. Mottola, Ms. Marmion, Mr. Testani, Mr. Curley. Oh, no, Ms. Marmion, you were a no. Sorry.
I need to abstain, Ms. Charlton.
Okay, let me do that again. I thought your hand was up. Okay, strike Ms. Marmion, Mr. Testani, Mr. Curley, Mr. Stark was a yes. Okay, and how about Ms. Leclerc?
Can you hear me?
Say it one more
Yes.
time there. Okay.
Mary Leclerc.
Mary Leclerc is a yes. Okay. So those minutes are approved. Okay. Done with minutes. All right. We're going to move on to item 8, to hear, consider, and act upon any communications. So Ms. Marmion, you have something?
I just have a question. Tonight it was really helpful when Mr. DeWitt put up the Senior and Disabled Tax Committee presentation. He shared the document. And when we were going through the quarterly report and, hearing from the town and the Board of Ed, I find it really hard to find what they're referencing. And I'm wondering if, as a request moving into the budget season, we can ask department heads or the administration to share whatever they're referring to on their screen. I think that would be helpful both to the board members as well as to anybody watching the Fair TV presentation, because they may not have that, very extensive backup. It's just a request, that I've been thinking about because I have trouble myself sometimes finding the information that's being referenced.
Okay, absolutely. I can do that. I mean, my feeling on that personally is I can't read what's on the screen, but if I see what's on the screen, it's
exactly
easy when you have the printed material, or if you're looking at it another screen, it does make it easy to follow which page is being referenced. So I'm happy to make that request of the town departments, and Mr. Schmidt, you'll be able to help us out there, I'm sure. Mr. Mottola, did you have a comment?
And I always forget. So we will get the budget book from the town after the Board of Selectmen votes on it, and also the Board of Ed budget books after the Board of Selectmen votes. Is that, I think generally that's how it works now.
Mr. Schmidt, do you want to comment?
Sure. Yeah, we'll get you budget books after the Board of Selectmen vote, and the current one is obviously online. So if you want to look at it in the meantime, you have that version. But we'll get it to you after the Board of Selectmen.
Thank you. Yeah, just want to clarify. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Walsh.
I think Ms. Marmion's request is a fair one and a good help. And I have found that Mr. Schmidt is very good at being able to put up the documents, because I've seen you do it before, Jared. Been very good about being able to put them up online. The only request I would ask is, once we're done with that document or whatever, I find it helpful that we all see each other, like talk normal.
Yes.
So if the document could be like taken down and not just like left up to hang up there, because otherwise our faces go very small across the top of the screen, and I'd rather kind of, since we're meeting remotely, I still find it helpful to see people's facial expressions and things like that.
Yeah, no, we will do that. And I know from my perspective, I can't see who's got a hand up, so I will absolutely make that request if we have, once we move off from the presenter and we're taking questions from the board, we will absolutely have people stop sharing a screen. Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you. Yeah, a lot of communications tonight. I spoke to our new budget director, Frank. I met him the other day. and nice guy. And I made the comment that I like the budget book myself, loose leaf in a binder like we got it last year. I don't know if you want to take a straw poll here or whatever, but I mean, that for me is the best. I don't know if you guys like it bound or not, but I'd even be willing to use the old binder from last year if you want to save a couple bucks. But just take a pulse of the board how we'd like those printed.
Yeah, if we have an option, I prefer loose leaf myself. Anyone else have an opinion?
Can I get mine in a leather binder? Brown leather.
Rejected.
Do you want it engraved with your initials?
Yeah, that'd be great. Just like my company. Sure.
Great. Okay. Anyone else have a preference? All right. Doesn't sound like it. Okay, Jared, if that's okay.
Three-ring binder.
Yeah. Three-ring
Sounds
binder
great, Jared.
would be good.
Okay.
Okay. Any other communications?
Nothing from me. Everybody have a good night.
Can I just say one thing, Mary? Madam Chairwoman.
Yeah.
Number one, thank you, first of all, for allowing Ms. Leclerc to be able to participate. I appreciate that. And I know I would honor that for anybody. So I really appreciate you going out of your way for that. So thank you for that. Jared and Caitlin, thanks for a great presentation.
Yeah, really great.
It was really good, thorough presentation, but yet concise, not drawn overly drawn out. And I just want to send a special thank you to Prue for sticking by us through this whole minute thing. I think we've all learned a lot. We're going to make it a lot smoother, but you are a recording secretary. I personally think you do a great job, and I hope you stay with us. So thank you.
You're here.
Agree.
Okay. All right. Anyone else? Okay, well then we will move to item 9, which is to adjourn. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Mr. Walsh, seconded by Mr. Testani. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Good night, everybody. We'll